I stopped by my daughter's place without warning. She was asleep on the floor by the door in old ripped clothes. Her husband wiped his shoes on her and told the guests, "She is our crazy servant." I did not yell. I stepped forward. What I did next changed the course of history for the Sterling family forever. But before I tell you how I destroyed his life, let me introduce myself. My name is Winston Carter. I am 68 years old, and I thought I had seen the worst of humanity during my time in the Marine Corps. I was wrong. The worst of humanity was standing in a bespoke Italian suit right inside my daughter's penthouse. I had come to visit Ebony unannounced. It had been 3 years since she cut me off, saying I would not understand her new life with Blake Sterling. I respected her wishes because I wanted her to be happy. But a father knows when something is wrong. I felt it in my bones. A cold chill that woke me up 3 nights in a row. So I put on my old work jacket, the one with the frayed collar, and I drove my rusted pickup truck to the city. I stood in the hallway of the luxury building. The door to the penthouse was cracked open just an inch. The smell hit me first, not expensive perfume or dinner cooking. Bleach, strong industrial bleach that burned. My nostrils mingled with the scent of stale urine. I pushed the door open silently, my hand automatically checking the pocket where I kept my phone. There was no furniture in the foyer, just a cold marble floor, and there in the corner, curled up like a frightened animal, was my Ebony. She was wearing a gray dress that looked more like a rag. The hem was torn, and I could see bruises on her legs, old yellow ones and fresh purple ones. Her hair, usually so proud and natural, was matted and dull. She was asleep right on the hard stone. The elevator dinged. I stepped back into the shadows of the coat closet, leaving the door slightly ajar. I needed to see. I needed to know before I acted. Blake Sterling walked in. He was laughing with 3 other men. They were loud. They smelled of expensive scotch and cigars. They were celebrating something. Blake stopped. He looked down at my daughter. She did not move. She did not breathe. She just lay there, freezing perfectly still, as if she was trying to merge with the floor. "Gentlemen, watch your step," Blake said. His voice was smooth like oil on water. "We have a bit of a pest problem." He did not ask if she was okay. He did not cover her with a jacket. He lifted his foot. I saw the mud on his golf cleats, thick brown clay mixed with grass. He placed his foot directly on the center of her back. She flinched but did not make a sound. He dragged his sole across her spine, wiping the mud off onto her dress like she was a welcome mat. One of the guests, a tall man with a red face, chuckled nervously. "Blake, is that?" "That is the help," Blake interrupted with a cruel smile. "She is our crazy servant. She likes to sleep there, thinks she is a dog. Honestly, it is pathetic, but we are too kind to throw her out. Just step around." Her step around her. He wiped his other shoe, grinding the heel into her shoulder blade. This time a small whimper escaped her lips. It was the sound of a broken spirit. I felt a rage so hot it almost blinded me. My hands shook, but not from fear. They shook from the effort of not rushing out there and snapping his neck right then and there. I remembered my training. Observe, document, strike. I pulled out my phone in the darkness of the closet. I hit record. I caught the mud on her dress. I caught the laughter of the men. I caught Blake kicking her leg lightly to move her out of the way. "Get up and clean this mess before the investors arrive later," he hissed at her. "You are embarrassing me." I had seen enough. I put the phone back in my pocket. I took a deep breath and I stepped out of the shadows. The air in the room changed instantly. The laughter died in the throats of his guests. Blake turned slowly. He did not look afraid. He looked annoyed, like I was a fly. He needed to swat. He looked at my worn-out jacket, my scuffed work boots, and his lip curled in disgust. Well, if it isn't Mr. Carter," Blake said, his voice dripping with condescension. "How did you get past security? Did you deliver a package? Or are you here to fix the toilet?" I stared him down. I did not blink. "I am here to see my daughter," I said, my voice low and steady. Blake laughed. It was a sharp barking sound. He turned to his friends. "Gentlemen, this is my father-in-law, poor old Winston. He lives off a government pension, barely enough to buy cat food. I suppose he finally ran out of money." He reached into his pocket. He pulled out a money clip thick with cash. He peeled off a few singles and crumpled them into a ball. He threw them at my chest. They bounced off me and landed on the floor next to Ebony. "There is $5, Blake said. "Go buy yourself a sandwich and get out of my house. You are smelling up the place with your poverty." I did not look at the money. I did not look at his friends. I kept my eyes locked on his. I saw the pupils, saw the dilate slightly. He was trying to assert dominance. He was trying to humiliate me, to make me feel small so I would leave without a fight. He thought he was looking at a broken old man. He had no idea. He was looking at the owner of the holding company that had just bought his bad debt that morning. I am not leaving without Ebony, I said. Blake stepped closer. He was taller than me, younger, but he was soft. I could see it in his stance. He had never fought for anything in his life. She is not going anywhere, he sneered. She is sick, Winston, very sick. She needs to be here where I can take care of her. Besides, look at her. She does not even know who you are. I looked down at my daughter Ebony. I whispered, "Baby girl, it is. Daddy, get up." She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were glassy pupils blown wide. She looked at me, but there was no recognition, only terror. She scrambled backward, her heels skidding on the marble. She covered her face with her hands. "Please don't hurt me." "Master," she whimpered, her voice trembling so hard the words barely came out. "I will clean it up. I will clean it all up with my tongue if I have to. Please no, the quiet room, not the quiet room." My heart shattered into a million pieces. Master. The quiet room. What had this monster done to my little girl? I stepped toward her to help her up, but Blake moved in front of me, blocking my path. "You see," he said, fixing his cuffs. "She is delusional, paranoid, schizophrenia. The doctors say she cannot be moved. She thinks everyone is trying to hurt her. If you touch her, she will scream, and I will have to call the police and tell them a senile old man is assaulting my mentally ill wife." I looked at his friends. They were uncomfortable now, shifting their weight, looking at the door. "I suggest you leave, Mr. Carter," Blake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Only I could hear, or I will make sure your pension gets cut off and you end up on the street where you belong." I clenched my fists. I could feel the tendons in my arms tightening. I could take him. I knew exactly where to strike to disable him in 3 seconds. But I looked at Ebony. She was rocking back and forth, muttering to herself. If I fought him now, the police would come. Blake was a Sterling in this city. The Sterlings owned the police chief. If I was arrested tonight, Ebony would be left alone with him, and he would punish her for my actions. I had to be smart. I had to be cold. I bent down not to pick up the money, but to pick up my hat, which had fallen. I looked Blake in the eye one last time. "You are right," I said, my voice flat, showing no emotion. "I cannot take care of her. Look at me. I am just a poor old man." Blake smiled. It was the smile of a predator who thinks he has one smart choice. "Winston, now get out." I turned to the door. I walked out of the penthouse, leaving my daughter on the floor, leaving the monster gloating. But as I walked down that hallway, I was not retreating. I was regrouping. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I had not used in 5 years. "Mr. Strickland," said when the voice answered on the first ring. Winston the lawyer answered. "You sound different. Is everything all right?" "No," I said, walking into the elevator. "Activate the Black Fund immediately. I want to buy this building. I want to buy every debt Blake Sterling has. I don't care how much it costs. Liquidate the offshore accounts if you have to." "Understood," Mr. Strickland said. "And Winston, what are we doing?" "We are going to war," I said as the elevator doors closed. "I am going to burn his world to the ground, and I am going to make him watch." I walked out of the building into the cold night air. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the hunt. Blake thought he had kicked a stray dog. He did not know. He had just woken up a sleeping lion. I sat in my truck and watched the penthouse window light up. I saw shadows moving. Blake was probably pouring drinks, laughing about the old man he had just humiliated. He had no idea that the old man was currently worth $400 million and was the new owner of the mortgage he was 3 months behind on. I replayed the video on my phone, the mud on her dress, the foot on her back. I saved it to the cloud. I saved it to 3 different servers. This was not just evidence, this was fuel. I drove away from the building, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I was going to get my daughter back, but first I had to dismantle the cage he had built around her brick by brick, dollar by dollar. I pulled into a motel on the outskirts of town. I did not go home. I could not go home. Not while Ebony was in that hell. I set up my command center on the small, wobbly desk. I pulled out my laptop and logged into the secure server. The first notification popped up. Purchase of Sterling Corp debt. Successful. I smiled a cold, humorless smile. Tomorrow Blake Sterling was going to receive a letter from his new creditor, and he was going to realize that the mud he wiped on my daughter was going to be the cleanest thing about him by the time I was finished with him. I bent down to scoop my daughter into my arms, disregarding the filth on her dress and the smell of industrial cleaner that clung to her skin. She flinched when my hands touched her shoulders, a reflex that tore a hole straight through my heart. She was trembling violently, her eyes fixed on the floor, unable to look at me or the man who had just used her as a doormat. I tightened my grip, ready to lift her, ready to carry her out of this penthouse and away from the monster who called himself her husband. But before I could straighten up, a heavy hand slammed onto my shoulder. I looked up to see Blake standing over me, his face twisted into a mask of mock concern, mixed with cold authority. He held a piece of paper in his other hand, waving it in front of my face like a weapon. "Stop right there, Winston," he said, his voice loud enough for his guests to hear. He was performing for them, trying to justify his cruelty. "Unless you want to be arrested for kidnapping a mentally incapacitated adult, I suggest. Bye. You unhand my wife." I stood up slowly, creating space between us. My eyes darted to the paper he was brandishing. It was a medical document stamped with the seal of a private psychiatric facility. I snatched it from his hand, my eyes scanning the text. Paranoid schizophrenia with violent tendencies. It read, signed by a Dr. Eris Thorne, a man I did not know but whose name I immediately committed to memory, recommending total isolation and home confinement for the safety of the patient and the public. "This is garbage," I growled, crumpling the paper in my fist. "My daughter is not insane. She is abused. Look at her. Blake, look at the bruises. Look at how she is cowering. You did this to her." Blake sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of patience wearing thin. He turned to his friends who were watching with morbid curiosity. "Gentlemen, please excuse my father-in-law. He is in denial. It has been very hard on the family seeing Ebony deteriorate like this. She hallucinates. She thinks everyone is trying to hurt her. If you take her out of this apartment, Winston, she will have an episode. She might hurt herself or someone else, and I will have no choice but to call the police and report that you have abducted a woman who has been legally deemed a danger to herself." I looked at Ebony again. She was rocking back and forth, muttering the same phrase over and over. "I will be good. I will be good." It was not schizophrenia. It was trauma. It was the result of systematic conditioning, breaking a human being down until they were nothing but a shell. Blake knew exactly what he was doing. He had a legal shield, a piece of paper bought and paid for, that gave him absolute power over her life. If I took her now, the police would stop me at the lobby. They would see a frantic, screaming woman and a black man in old work clothes dragging her against her will, and they would side with the white man in the suit. Holding the doctor's note, I stepped closer to him, invading his personal space until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You and I both know this is a lie," I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You bought this diagnosis just like you bought those shoes you wiped on her." Blake stepped back, wiping imaginary dust from his lapel. "Careful, Winston," he said, his tone sharpening. "Your aggression is noted. Do not make me call security. I am taking her to a real doctor," I stated, moving to grab Ebony's arm again. "No, you are not," Blake barked, losing his composure for a fraction of a second before regaining his sneer. "Look at you. Winston, look at yourself. You are pathetic. You want to take her where? To the county hospital to sit in a waiting room for 12 hours with the junkies and the homeless. You want to take her back to what, that rundown shack you call a home." He gestured at my worn flannel jacket and my mud-stained boots, his eyes raking over me with absolute disgust. "You are a retired. Nobody living on what, an $800 a month pension. You cannot even afford to feed yourself properly, let alone pay for the specialized care Ebony needs here. She has private doctors, she has medication, she has a roof over her head that does not leak." He laughed, a dry, humorless sound that grated on my nerves. "You think you are saving her, but you would kill her. Winston, she is fragile. She needs a sterile environment. She needs round-the-clock monitoring. Do you have the money for that? Do you have the resources to keep her safe? Or are you just going to let her rot in your poverty until she dies of an infection or wanders off into the street because you were too busy counting your pennies to watch her?" His words hit me like physical blows, not because they were true, but because they revealed exactly how he saw me and how he expected the world to see me to him. I was just an old black man who had aged out of usefulness, a relic with empty pockets and no power. He thought money was the only thing that mattered, and because he thought I had none, he believed I was nothing. He was using my cover against me, the modest life I had chosen. The low profile I maintained, all of it was now a weapon in his hands. "You are going to take her to your ghetto and she is going to die there," Blake hissed, leaning in close so only I could hear. "Do you want that on your conscience, old man? Leave her here where I can manage her condition. Go back to your little life and wait for the check I send you every month because that is the only contribution you are capable of making." I felt the blood hammering in my temples. My fists clenched so hard my knuckles popped. Every instinct I had from my time in the Corps screamed at me to strike, to silence him permanently, to smash that arrogant jaw and show him exactly what kind of violence I was capable of. But I looked at his friends, 3 wealthy, influential men watching us like we were a television show. If I hit him now, I would go to jail and Ebony would be left alone with him forever, with no one to watch over her, no one to save her. I realized then that fists would not win this. War, Blake Sterling, did not respect strength. He respected leverage, he respected currency, he respected the power to buy and sell human lives. He thought he was untouchable because he had money and I did not. He was wrong. Dead. Wrong. But I could not show him my cards yet. I forced my hands to unclench. I forced my breathing to slow down. I had to retreat to win. I had to lose this battle to win the war. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, leaving my daughter on that cold floor. But I knew that if I stayed, I would lose everything. "You are right," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the rage burning inside me. "I cannot pay for private doctors. I am just a pensioner." Blake smiled a triumphant smirk that made my stomach turn. "Exactly," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder heavily. "Now, be a good father and let us handle this. You have overstayed your welcome." "Winston," I nodded, keeping my eyes lowered. I turned to look at Ebony. One last time, she was still muttering, eyes squeezed shut, blocking out the world. "Am coming back for you, baby girl. I thought I promised you I am coming back with the wrath of God." I turned to leave, heading for the door, but as I passed the console table in the foyer, the one with the oversized vase and the pile of unopened mail, I stumbled slightly. I let out a groan, feigning the weakness of old age, and dropped to one knee. "Oops, careful there, old-timer," one of Blake's friends called out, laughing. I did not look at them. I reached for my hat, which I had dropped earlier, but as my hand swept under the lip of the table, I pulled a small black disc from my sleeve. It was a high-grade listening device, military spec, smaller than a quarter with a battery life of 3 weeks. I pressed it firmly against the underside of the wood where it would be invisible to anyone not looking for it. I grabbed my hat and groaned as I pulled myself up, using the table for support. Blake was watching me with a look of pure pity mixed with revulsion. "Just go, Winston," he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. I walked out the door, the heavy wood clicking shut behind me, sealing my daughter inside that hell. The sound echoed in the hallway, final and ominous. I stood there for a moment listening, my heart rate slowing, my mind shifting from the hot chaos of anger to the cold precision of a tactical strike. I walked to the elevator, my steps heavy, not with age but with purpose. I rode down to the lobby, keeping my head down, avoiding the gaze of the concierge who looked at my clothes with suspicion. I walked out into the cool night air, the city sounds washing over me, sirens, distant traffic, the hum of life continuing while my world had stopped. I walked 2 blocks to where I had parked my rusted pickup truck. I climbed inside, the smell of old coffee and grease, comforting me, grounding me. I did not start the engine immediately. Instead, I reached into the glove box and pulled out a burner phone, the one I used for business, the business nobody knew about. I dialed a number from memory. It rang. "Once." "Yes, sir." The voice on the other end was crisp, professional. "Mr. Strickland, my attorney and the only man who knew the full extent of the Carter Empire." "Strickland," I said, my voice unrecognizable even to myself, cold and hard like steel. "Winston, is everything all right?" Strickland asked, sensing the shift in my tone. "No," I said, staring at the penthouse lights glowing in the distance high above the city. "Activate the Black Fund." There was a pause on the other end. The Black Fund was a reserve of liquid capital I had set aside for catastrophic emergencies, a nuclear option that I had hoped never to use. It contained enough capital to level a small country's economy if used aggressively. "The entire fund, sir?" Strickland asked, his voice dropping a whisper. "The entire fund," I repeated. "I want you to look up the Sterling Plaza. The building at 405 Grand Avenue. The residential tower. Yes, I know it, Strickland confirmed. Who holds the mortgage, I asked. It is likely a consortium of banks, commercial real estate. Debt is usually packaged. I can find out in 10 minutes. Do it, I said. I want you to buy the note. I want you to buy the building. I want you to buy the ground. It sits on. I do not care what the premium is. Offer them. Double offer them. Triple. Just get it done tonight. Winston, this is hundreds of millions of dollars. Are you sure? I looked at the video on my phone again. The frame where Blake's muddy shoe pressed into my daughter's back. I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I said, I want to own the heir. He breathes. Strickland. I want to be his landlord, his creditor, and his executioner. Understood, sir, Strickland said. I will wake up the partners. We will have the paperwork initiated within the hour. Anything else? Yes, I said, starting the truck, the engine roaring to life. Dig into Blake Sterling. I want to know everything: who he owes, who he sleeps with, what he eats for breakfast. If he has a parking ticket from 1999, I want to know about it. He called me a poor old man. Strickland. He thinks I am helpless. I will get the team on it immediately. Good, I said, putting the truck into gear. I am going to show him exactly what an $800 pension looks like when it is backed by $500 million in private equity. I hung up the phone and pulled out into traffic. I was not Winston Carter, the retired grandfather, anymore. I was Winston Carter the shark, and there was blood in the water. I sat in the cab of my rusted pickup truck 2 blocks away from the Sterling Plaza. The engine was off, and the cold city air seeped through the cracks in the weather, stripping. But I did not feel the cold. I felt only the burning heat of the small earpiece tucked into my right ear canal. The device was transmitting a live feed from the bug I had planted under the console table in the penthouse foyer. The connection was crystal clear. Too clear. I heard the heavy oak door slam shut behind me, sealing my daughter in that golden cage. The sound was followed by a moment of silence, the kind of heavy silence that precedes a thunderclap. I closed my eyes and gripped the steering wheel, my leather gloves creaking under the pressure. Well, that was embarrassing, Blake said, his voice coming through the speaker with a distorted metallic edge. He sounded bored now that his performance for me was over. I heard the rustle of fabric, Ebony shifting on the floor, trying to make herself small, trying to disappear. Held my breath, waiting for her to speak, to stand up to run, but there was only the sound of her shallow, terrified breathing. Get up, Blake commanded. I heard the scuff of shoe leather on marble, then a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was a dull, wet thud, the sound of a heavy boot connecting with soft tissue, followed immediately by a sharp expulsion of air, a gasp that turned into a retching cough. He kicked her. I slammed my fist against the dashboard, denting the old plastic. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive the truck through the lobby doors and tear him apart with my bare hands. But I forced myself to stay put. I was a Marine. Discipline was my religion. If I went back up there now without a plan, without leverage, I would end up in a cell and Ebony would end up dead. I had to listen. I had to witness. I had to let the rage forge me into a weapon. Look what you made me do, Blake hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous low growl. My father-in-law comes here smelling like a sewer, and you just lie there like a corpse. You embarrass me in front of the partners. Ebony, please, I heard her whimper, and it sounded like she was speaking through a mouthful of blood. I am sorry, Master. I tried to be good. Don't call me that when guests are here, Blake snapped. You make me sound like a monster. Another thud. This one sounded like a ribs cracking. Ebony cried out a high, thin sound that was cut short. You are a monster, I whispered to the empty truck, tears streaming down my face, hot and angry. The guests laughed in the background, nervous, tittering laughter that made my blood boil. They were watching this. They were drinking his scotch and watching him beat his wife, and they did nothing. They were complicit, every single one of them. Get her out of my sight, Blake ordered. Throw her in the shower and scrub her down. She smells like fear and poverty. Make sure she is ready for tonight. If she twitches even once during the dinner, I will break her fingers. I heard the sound of her being dragged across the floor, her heels squeaking on the polished stone. Then a door slammed and the audio feed shifted to the ambient noise of the living room, the clinking of glasses, the murmur of men discussing golf scores as if a woman had not just been assaulted in front of them. I took the earpiece out for a second. rubbing my face. My hands were shaking violently. I needed to calm down. I needed to think. I reached into the glove box and pulled out a bottle of water, taking a long drink, washing away the bile that had risen in my throat. I put the earpiece back in, just as the guests were leaving. I heard the elevator ding, the polite goodbyes, the false camaraderie. Once the door closed again, the silence returned, but this time it was different. It was the silence of a man alone with his problems. I heard footsteps pacing back and forth, heavy, agitated strides, then the sound of a phone being dialed. Pick up, you useless old bat," Blake muttered. Finally, the call connected, Mother Blake said. His voice, changing instantly gone, was the arrogant master of the house. In his place was a whining, desperate child. I turned up the volume on my receiver. "Yes, the partners just left," Blake said, pacing faster. I heard the ice in his glass clink. "No, they did not sign yet. They want to see the domestic stability clause fulfilled. They want to meet Ebony." There was a pause while his mother spoke on the other end. "I know she is a liability," Mother Blake snapped, "but I do not have a choice. We need this deal. The bank called again today. They are threatening to foreclose on the Hamptons house, and the yacht has already been seized." I froze my hand, hovering over the volume knob. Foreclosed, seized. The Sterlings were not just cash poor, they were drowning. "Listen to me," Blake hissed, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "We are down to our last $50,000 in liquid assets. If I do not close this investment deal for the new city project tonight, we are finished. Do you understand? Finished. We will be on the street with nothing but the clothes on our backs. I need Ebony to play the part of the doting trophy wife, just for tonight." He paused, listening again. "I know she is broken," he said dismissively. "I broke her. Remember, that was the plan. Break her spirit, make her compliant so she would sign the trust fund release. But the stupid bitch is too far gone now. She flinches. If I raise a hand, she cries. If I look at her wrong, I had to drug her just to get her to stop screaming this morning. My stomach churned. Trust fund release. So that was the game Ebony had inherited. A substantial trust from her grandmother, my late wife's mother. A trust I thought was locked up tight until she turned 35. Blake had been torturing her not just for pleasure but for profit. He was trying to force her to sign over the only thing she had left. "Do not worry, Mother," Blake said, regaining some of his composure. "I gave her a double dose of the special vitamin. She will be a zombie, but a smiling zombie. Just pray she does not drool on the investors." He hung up the phone, and I heard him pour another drink. Special vitamin. I knew then that time was not just running out. It was gone. I started the truck, the engine rumbling to life beneath me. I had to move fast. Blake was desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. He was cornered financially, and he was using my daughter as a human shield. I pulled away from the curb, leaving the Sterling Plaza behind in the rearview mirror, but I was not leaving the fight. I was going to get ammunition. I drove 20 minutes to a nondescript diner on the edge of the industrial district, the kind of place where truckers and night shift workers ate pie at 3 in the afternoon. I parked in the back where the shadows were long and deep. A gray sedan was already waiting there, the engine running. I climbed out of my truck and walked over to the sedan. The window rolled down, revealing the face of Marcus, my private investigator. Marcus was a former detective who had been pushed out of the force for being too honest. He had been working for me for 10 years, and he was the best in the business. He did not say hello. He just handed me a thick manila envelope through the window. "It is worse than we thought," Winston Marcus said, his voice grim. I opened the envelope under the dim yellow light of the street lamp. The first page was a medical report, but not from a hospital. It was a toxicology screen, run on a hair sample I had managed to snag from Ebony's brush the last time I saw her 3 years ago, compared against a sample Marcus had obtained from the penthouse trash yesterday. "What am I looking at?" I asked, my eyes scanning the chemical names. "Ketamine," Marcus said, pointing to a highlighted line, "and xylazine. It is a veterinary sedative used for horses and cattle." Winston. "He is not treating her schizophrenia. He is tranquilizing her like a wild animal." I felt the blood drain from my face. Veterinary drugs that explained the glassy eyes, the lack of recognition, the motor control issues. He was poisoning her, slowly, frying her neural pathways to keep her docile. "If he keeps this up," Marcus said quietly, "she will have permanent brain damage within 6 months, maybe less, depending on the dosage." He handed me another sheet. This one was a bank dossier, And here is the financial picture. Marcus continued. Sterling Corp is a shell game. They have been insolvent for 2 years, borrowing from Peter to pay. Paul Blake has leveraged everything, the penthouse, the cars, the family estate. He is overextended by $40 million. I looked at the numbers. Columns of red ink that represented the collapse of a dynasty. Who holds the debt? I asked. Marcus smiled a tight, predatory smile. That is the good news. I traced the distressed asset bundles. Most of the toxic debt was packaged and sold off by the primary lenders last week to a high-risk holding company. I nodded, pulling out my phone. I saw a notification from Mr. Strickland, my lawyer. It was a single line of text secure message. I opened. The app and read the message. Transaction complete. Carter Holdings now owns 45% of Sterling Corp's distressed debt obligations. We are the majority creditor, effective immediately. I looked up at Marcus, and for the first time that night, I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who just found the key to his enemy's cell. He is broke, I said, tapping the paper. He is poisoning my daughter, and he is broke. Marcus nodded. He is desperate. Winston that makes him volatile, but it also makes him careless. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of $100 bills, handing them to Marcus. Keep digging. I want to know who his dealer is. I want to know where he gets the drugs. Already on it, Marcus said, rolling up the window. I walked back to my truck, the envelope clutched in my hand like a weapon. Blake Sterling thought he was the king of the world, hosting a party for his investors tonight, thinking he could parade my daughter around like a show pony while he secured his future. He had no idea that the man he had kicked out of his house, the poor old man with the $800 pension, now owned 45% of the air. He breathed. I climbed into the truck and looked at the clock. It was 6 p.m. The party started at 8. I had 2 hours to turn his celebration into a funeral. I picked up my phone and dialed Strickland again. Send the notice. I said, my voice cold. Send the demand for immediate repayment of the loan. Steer it directly to his personal email and mark it urgent. Make sure he gets it right before the appetizers are served. Strickland hesitated. Sir, that will cause a scene. I started the engine and looked toward the city skyline where the lights of the penthouse were just beginning to twinkle. That is the point. Strickland, I said, I want a scene. I want chaos, because chaos is the only ladder I can use to get Ebony out of there. I hung up and drove back toward the city. The envelope on the seat beside me was heavy with the weight of my daughter's suffering, but the notification on my phone was the hammer I was going to use to smash her chains. Tonight the devil was throwing a party, and I was going to be the uninvited guest who brought the fire. I sat in the darkness of the motel room, the blue light of my laptop screen illuminating the cheap peeling wallpaper behind me. I had tapped into the penthouse security system thanks to a backdoor code my old IT team had exploited 10 minutes ago. The feed was grainy, but I could see everything. The living room was transformed into a stage for Blake Sterling's grand performance. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier. Bottles of vintage wine stood in rows like soldiers, and in the center of it all stood Blake, adjusting his silk tie, looking every inch the master of the universe. But then his phone buzzed. I saw him pull it from his pocket, his face relaxed and arrogant until his eyes locked on the screen. I knew exactly what he was reading. It was a notification from Carter Holdings, the shell company I had established hours ago, demanding immediate repayment of $40 million in distressed debt or the initiation of immediate foreclosure proceedings. I watched the color drain from his face. He looked like a man who had just been shot in the gut. He tapped the screen furiously, probably trying to call his lawyer or his banker, but nobody would answer him. Not tonight. Not with my team, blocking the lines. He was trapped, and like a rat in a corner, he needed something to bite. He looked around the room, his eyes wild and frantic, searching for a target. They landed on Ebony. She was standing by the kitchen door, dressed in a simple black maid uniform that was too big for her, hanging off her gaunt frame. She was swaying slightly, the drugs still clouding her mind, trying to stay upright. Blake stormed over to her, grabbing her by the arm so hard I saw her wince, even through the pixelated screen. "You useless waste of space," he hissed. I could hear him through the audio feed I had synced with the video. "Look at you standing there like a statue. Make yourself useful." He dragged her to the center of the room, right in front of the plush leather sofas where his guests would be sitting in minutes. "Get down," he ordered, pointing at the floor. Ebony looked at him, confusion swimming in her glassy eyes. "What I said. Get on your knees," Blake shouted, shoving her down. She collapsed onto the hard wood, her knees hitting the floor with a bone-jarring crack. She cried out, but he ignored it. He grabbed a heavy silver tray loaded with crystal decanters and slammed it into her hands. "Hold this up," he commanded. "You are going to be the table tonight. Since you cannot seem to act like a wife, you can act like the furniture. Maybe that will teach you some humility." He positioned her so she was facing the guests but looking down, her arms trembling under the weight of the heavy silver. "Hold it steady," he warned. "If you spill a single drop of this scotch, I will make you lick it off the floor." I watched my daughter, my beautiful, strong daughter, reduced to a piece of furniture, trembling in fear, while her husband fixed his hair in the mirror, preparing to charm the men whose money he desperately needed. My finger hovered over the enter key on my keyboard. I wanted to burn his life down right now, but I had to wait. I had to wait for the audience. The guests arrived 10 minutes later, 3 men and 2 women dripping in jewels and expensive cologne. The most important one was a man named Arthur Vance, the venture capitalist. Blake was pinning his hopes on. He walked in with his wife on one arm and a young blonde woman on the other, a woman I recognized from Marcus's dossier. Camilla Rhodes, Blake's mistress, and the daughter of a rival real estate mogul. "What a charming touch," Vance said, looking at Ebony with amusement. "A living table, very avant-garde." Blake laughed, a nervous tittering sound. "Yes, well, good help is so hard to find these days. We make do with what we have." They sat down around Ebony, treating her like she was made of wood, grabbing drinks from the tray she held. Her arms were shaking violently now, sweat beading on her forehead. The strain of holding that weight in her drugged state must have been agonizing. Camilla sat closest to Ebony. She was wearing a red dress that cost more than my truck, and she looked at my daughter with pure, unadulterated hatred. She knew exactly who Ebony was. She knew this was the wife. The obstacle, the woman standing between her and Blake's fortune. Camilla reached for a glass of red wine, her movements languid and predatory. She took a sip, her eyes locked on Ebony's face. "You are shaking," she said, her voice loud and clear in the quiet room. "You are making the wine ripple." Ebony did not answer. She just kept her head down, trying to hold the tray steady. "Look at me when I talk to you," Camilla snapped. Ebony looked up, her eyes filled with tears and terror. "Oops," Camilla said, and with a flick of her wrist, she threw the contents of her glass into Ebony's face. The dark red liquid splashed over my daughter's eyes, dripping down her nose, soaking into the white collar of her uniform. It looked like blood. Ebony gasped. Dropping the tray, it crashed to the floor. Glass shattering, crystal shards flying everywhere. Expensive scotch pooling on the rug. The room went silent. "You stupid, clumsy animal," Camilla shrieked, standing up and wiping a few drops of wine from her own dress. "Look, what you did, you ruined the mood." She stepped forward and slapped Ebony across the face, a sharp, stinging sound that echoed through my speakers. Ebony fell back onto her heels, crying silently, holding her cheek. Blake did not help her. He did not defend her. He joined in. "I told you," he roared, standing over her, his face purple with rage. "I told you not to drop it. You are worthless. Absolutely worthless." The guests laughed. It started as a chuckle from Vance, then his wife joined in, then the others. They were laughing at my daughter, covered in wine and glass, cowering on the floor while her husband and his mistress berated her. I felt a cold calm settle over me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The evidence of their depravity was recorded. The humiliation was complete. Now it was time for the execution. I looked at the screen, watching Vance. He was laughing, but his hand was under the table, resting on Camilla's knee, squeezing it familiarly, while his wife sat right next to him, oblivious, sipping her drink. I opened a new window on my laptop. I had prepared for this. Marcus had sent me a file earlier that day, a collection of photos taken over the last month. Vance and Camilla at a hotel. Vance and Camilla in a parked car. Vance and Camilla looking very much like people who were not just business associates. I selected the most incriminating photo, one where Vance was kissing Camilla's neck while his hand was up her skirt, and I attached it to a text message. I entered the number for Mrs. Vance's cell phone, which was sitting on the table right next to her wine glass. I typed a simple message. "Ask your husband why he is so interested in the hostess." I hit send. On the screen, I saw Mrs. Vance's phone light up. She glanced at it casually, then froze. She picked up the phone, her eyes widening. She looked at the photo, then she looked at her husband, whose hand was still on Camilla's knee. The laughter in the room died instantly. Mrs. Vance stood up so fast her chair tipped over. "You bastard!" she screamed, throwing the phone at her husband. It hit him in the chest and clattered to the floor. Arthur Vance scrambled to pick it up, but his wife was already unleashing a torrent of fury. She grabbed a bottle of wine from the table and swung it, not at him, but at Camilla. The bottle connected with Camilla's shoulder, sending her sprawling onto the floor next to Ebony. Chaos erupted. The other guests jumped up, shouting. Vance tried to grab his wife, but she slapped him, a sound much louder than the one Camilla had given Ebony. "The deal is off." "Blake," Vance yelled, trying to shield himself from his wife's blows. "This is a madhouse we are leaving." "No, wait," Blake pleaded, running after them. "Arthur, please, we need this capital." "Go to hell," Vance shouted, dragging his screaming wife out the door. The other guests followed, fleeing the scene like rats leaving a sinking ship. Within seconds, the room was empty except for Blake, Camilla, and Ebony. Blake stood in the center of the ruined party, his chest heaving, his future walking out the door. He turned slowly to look at Ebony, who was still on the floor, wiping wine from her eyes. "You," he whispered, the sound filled with a terrifying promise of violence. "You did this. You ruined everything." He lunged at her, grabbing her by the hair. He dragged her across the floor through the broken glass and the spilled liquor. "No," Ebony screamed, her voice raw. "Please, Blake, I didn't do anything." "Shut up," he roared, dragging her toward the hallway, toward the back of the penthouse, toward the closet I had heard him mention before. "You need a time-out," Blake hissed, his eyes bulging with madness. "You need to learn how to be quiet." He opened a narrow door and threw her inside. I heard her body hit the back wall. Then he slammed the door, and I heard the click of a heavy lock. "I am going to leave you in there until you rot," he shouted at the closed door. "Maybe when you are starving and begging for water, you will learn your place." Camilla stood up, rubbing her shoulder. "Get rid of her, Blake," she spat. "Get rid of her, or I am leaving too." I did not wait to hear his answer. I stood up, knocking my chair over. I grabbed the tire iron from under the motel bed and shoved it into my belt. I ran out of the room and jumped into my truck. The engine roared to life as I peeled out of the parking lot. Blake thought he had locked her away. He thought he had silenced her. He had no idea that he had just started the clock on his own destruction. I was coming, and this time I was not going to knock. I stood in the hallway of the Sterling Plaza, the master key card heavy in my hand. It was a piece of plastic no bigger than a credit card, but it represented absolute power. Mr. Strickland had delivered it to me at the motel just 30 minutes ago, along with the deed to the building. I was no longer a trespasser. I was the landlord inspecting his property, and I had reason to believe a tenant was damaging the premises. I swiped the card over the sensor. The light turned from angry red to inviting green with a soft mechanical click. The lock disengaged. I pushed the heavy oak door open and stepped into the penthouse. The silence hit me first. It was not the peaceful silence of a sleeping home. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a graveyard. The air was thick with the metallic tang of spilled wine and the stale smoke of expensive cigars. The wreckage of the party lay scattered across the floor like the aftermath of a hurricane. Broken crystal shards glinted in the moonlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Dark puddles of red wine soaked into the white wool rugs, looking like bloodstains. I gripped the tire iron I had tucked into my belt, feeling the cold steel against my side. My boots made no sound on the hardwood floor. I moved with the muscle memory of a man who had spent years hunting in the jungle. Every sense was dialed up to 11. Every shadow was a potential threat. I checked the living room. Empty. I checked the kitchen. Empty. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren far below on the city streets. I moved toward the hallway, the long corridor that led to the bedrooms and to the closet. I had heard Blake mention the closet where he said he would leave her to rot. The door was unassuming, painted the same cream color as the walls, but it had a heavy deadbolt installed at eye level, a lock that had no business being on an interior door, unless you were trying to keep something in or keep the screams out. I stood in front of it listening. I pressed my ear against the wood, but I heard nothing. That was the point of a quiet room. It was designed to swallow sound, to erase existence. I did not bother with the lock. I did not want to waste time fumbling with picks. I took a step back, raised my leg, and drove the heel of my work boot directly into the space next to the handle. The wood splintered with a loud crack. The door swung inward, revealing a darkness so complete it felt like a physical weight. I pulled a small flashlight from my pocket and clicked it on the beam, cut through the blackness and landed on the floor of the closet. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It washed over me in a wave, thick and nauseating. It was the smell of fear, of stale sweat, of old blood and fresh urine. It was the smell of a cage. And there, in the center of the small soundproofed box, was my daughter. Ebony was curled into a fetal position, her knees pulled up to her chest. She was bound with heavy industrial zip ties, her hands behind her back, her ankles locked together. A strip of silver duct tape was wrapped around her head, covering her mouth, sealing her scream inside her throat. Her eyes were wide open, staring into the beam of my light. They were dilated, pupils blown black with terror. She did not blink. She did not move. She was frozen in a state of catatonic shock. I dropped to my knees beside her, the tire iron clattering to the floor. "Ebony," I whispered, my voice cracking. "Baby girl, it is. Daddy." She flinched violently, trying to scramble backward away from me, her heels scraping uselessly against the floor. She made a muffled sound behind the tape, a high-pitched whine of pure panic. She did not recognize me. The drugs and the trauma had stripped away her ability to process reality. She only saw another man coming to hurt her. I reached out slowly, keeping my hands where she could see them. "It is okay," I said, soft and low. "It is okay. I am going to get you out of here." I pulled a pocket knife from my belt and carefully sliced through the tape, holding her ankles. She kicked out weakly, but I held her legs firm. Once her feet were free, I moved to her hands. She was trembling so hard I was afraid I would cut her skin, but the blade was sharp and the plastic ties snapped with a pop. She pulled her arms forward, rubbing her wrists where the plastic had dug into her skin, leaving angry red welts. I reached for the tape on her face. "This is going to hurt," I whispered. "I am sorry." I peeled it back as gently as I could, but it still pulled at her skin. She gasped as her mouth was freed, taking in a huge gulp of air as if she had been drowning. "Daddy." She croaked, her voice raw and broken. "Yes, baby, I am here." I pulled her into my arms, hugging her tightly against my chest. She smelled of the filth of this room, but to me she smelled like my little girl. She buried her face in my shoulder and began to sob, great heaving shudders that shook her entire body. I held her, rocking her back and forth, whispering promises I intended to keep. "I am going to kill him. I thought I am going to tear him apart piece by piece, but we had to get out of here first. This room, this house, it was poison." "Can you walk?" I asked, pulling back to look at her face. She nodded, wiping tears and snot from her face with the back of her hand. "I think so." We stood up together. I kept my arm around her waist, supporting her weight. She was so thin I could feel her ribs through the fabric of her ruined uniform. We stepped out of the closet and into the hallway, and that was when I saw him. Blake was standing at the end of the corridor, silhouetted by the light from the living room. He was disheveled, his shirt unbuttoned, his tie hanging loose around his neck. He was swaying slightly, holding a bottle of scotch in one hand and a 9-iron golf club in the other. Well, he slurred, his voice thick with alcohol and rage. "Look, who it is. The garbage man. And the garbage." He took a step forward, dragging the head of the golf club against the floor, made a scraping sound that set my teeth on edge. "You broke into my house," Blake said, raising the club, his eyes focusing on me with murderous intent. "You are trespassing." "Winston, that gives me the right to defend my property." I pushed Ebony behind me gently. "Stay back," I whispered. I picked up the tire iron from where I had dropped it by the closet door. It felt balanced and lethal in my hand. "Get out of my way, Blake," I said, my voice calm, cold, deadly. "I am taking my daughter. You are not taking anything," Blake roared, suddenly lunging forward. He raised the golf club high over his head, aiming for my skull. He was fast for a drunk man, fueled by the desperate fury of a man who has lost everything. Ebony screamed. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I stepped into the swing. As his arm came down, I raised my left arm, blocking the shaft of the club with my forearm. The metal bit into my flesh, but I ignored the pain. I was already moving. With my right hand, I drove the tire iron into his solar plexus. It was a short, controlled strike, just enough to knock the wind out of him. Blake doubled over, gasping, the club falling from his grip. I dropped the tire iron. I did not need it anymore. I grabbed his right wrist, the one that had held the club, with both of my hands. I twisted outward, using his own momentum against him, applying pressure to the joint. He screamed as he felt the ligaments strain. "You think you are tough, Blake," I whispered, leaning close to his ear. "You think because you beat a woman, you are a man." I applied more pressure, forcing him to his knees. "You are nothing," I hissed. He tried to punch me with his left hand, a clumsy, flailing blow. I caught it easily and twisted that arm behind his back, forcing his face into the floor. "Please," he wheezed, spitting blood onto the hardwood. "Let me go." I looked down at him, this man who had tortured my daughter, who had treated her like an animal, who had wiped his shoes on her spine. I tightened my grip on his right wrist. I felt the bones shifting, grating against each other. "I was a Marine son," I whispered, my voice devoid of mercy. And then with a sharp, sudden jerk, I snapped his wrist. The sound was like a dry branch breaking in a winter forest, loud and final. Blake shrieked a sound of pure agony that echoed through the penthouse. He writhed on the floor, clutching his broken hand, tears streaming down his face. I stood up and stepped over him. Ebony was staring at me, her eyes wide with shock and awe. She had never seen this side of me. She had only known the gentle father who planted flowers and fixed bicycles. She had never met. "Sergeant Carter." "Let us go," I said, taking her hand. We walked past Blake, who was curled in a ball, sobbing into the rug. "You broke my hand," he wailed. "I am going to sue you. I am going to call the police. You assaulted me." I stopped and looked back at him. "Go ahead." "Call them," I said. "Tell them I broke into my own building. Tell them I stopped you from torturing your wife. Tell them everything, Blake, because the more you, talk, the deeper you dig your grave." We walked out of the penthouse, leaving the door open behind us. I could hear him screaming for Siri to call 911, his voice growing fainter as we reached the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby, my arm around my daughter. She leaned into me, her head on my shoulder. "Is it over, Daddy?" she whispered. I kissed the top of her head, smelling the bleach and the fear fading away, replaced by the clean scent of freedom. "Not yet, baby," I said, watching the numbers count down. "Not yet, but the hard part is done now. We watch him burn." I drove the sedan through the iron gates of the safe house, a secluded villa on the outskirts of the city that I had bought under a shell company 10 years ago. It was invisible to the world, a ghost property that did not exist on any public record except as a tax write-off for a defunct agricultural firm. I carried Ebony inside, kicking open the front door, my arms burning from her weight. She was shivering violently now, her teeth chattering so hard I was afraid they would crack. I laid her on the sofa in the living room and immediately called Dr. Evans. He was a former combat medic who owed me his life and his medical license. He arrived 12 minutes later with a black bag and no questions. "Get her hydrated," Evans ordered, checking her pupils. "She is going into withdrawal. The ketamine is leaving her system and her brain is misfiring. Hold her down. Winston, this is going to get ugly." For the next 2 hours, I held my daughter while she screamed and thrashed, fighting demons. I could not see Evans. Pushed fluids and a counter-agent into her arm, his face grim. She vomited bile. She cried for her mother. She begged the walls to stop closing in. Then the fever broke. She went limp, her breathing leveling out into a ragged rhythm. She opened her eyes, and for the first time in 3 years, she saw me, really saw me. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "I am here, baby girl," I said, smoothing her matted hair away from her forehead. "You are safe." "No." She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "No, not safe. He knows, Daddy. He knows about the taxes." I frowned. "What taxes?" "Ebony. The papers." She gasped, tears leaking from her eyes. "Blake showed me the papers from the IRS. He said you evaded taxes for 20 years. He said you owed millions. He said they were coming to arrest you to put you in a hole where I would never see you again." I froze, my heart turning to ice. I had never evaded a tax in my life. I paid every cent I owed precisely to avoid this kind of leverage. "He lied to you, baby," I said, softly. "He showed me the warrant," she sobbed. "He said he could make it go away. He said his family knew judges. He said if I signed the trust transfer, he would save you, Daddy. I had to save you. I could not let you go to jail." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Blake had not just tortured her physically, he had tortured her with her love for me. He had forged documents, created a fake crisis, and used her loyalty as a weapon against her. She had endured 3 years of hell. She had let him drug her, beat her, and humiliate her. Not because she was weak, but because she was trying to protect me. She had signed away her grandmother's inheritance to keep her father free. I pulled her into my chest, burying my face in her neck so she would not see the murderous rage in my eyes. "You did good, baby," I whispered, my voice thick. "You saved me. You are a hero." "But I did not sign the last one," she mumbled, her eyes drooping again. "The one for the land, the grandmother's estate in Georgia. He was so mad, Daddy, that is why he put me in the quiet room," he said. "If I did not sign it by tomorrow, he was going to call the FBI on you. The land, the ancestral land in Georgia, that had been in her mother's family for generations, it was worth millions, but to us it was priceless. Blake wanted it all. He wanted to strip us bare. Rest now, I told her, we will fix this." I stood up, my knees cracking. Dr. Evans was packing his bag. "She needs rest, Winston," he said quietly. "And she needs a hospital. This is just a Band-Aid. She has severe malnutrition and signs of long-term nerve damage." "I know," I said, walking him to the door. "Thank you, Evans." I locked the door and went back to the living room. I sat in the armchair watching my daughter sleep, plotting the destruction of the Sterling bloodline. Then the room exploded with light. Blue and red lights flashed through the sheer curtains, painting the walls in a chaotic strobe. The sound of sirens cut through the rural silence, growing louder and louder until they were right on top of us. I ran to the window. Police cars. 4 of them were screeching to a halt on the gravel driveway. Doors flew open and uniformed officers poured out, guns drawn. I cursed. I had checked for trackers on the car. I had checked my own phone, but I had forgotten to check Ebony's uniform. Somewhere in the lining of that maid's dress, Blake had sewn a tag. "Open up, this is the police. We have the building surrounded." I looked at Ebony. She was stirring, terrified by the noise. I looked at the back door, but it was too late. I could hear boots pounding on the back deck. They had us boxed in. I had a choice. I could fight. I could take out 2 or 3 of them before they overwhelmed me. But that would get me killed, or worse, it would get Ebony killed in the crossfire. I raised my hands and walked to the front door. I opened it slowly. "Get on the ground. Get on the ground. Now." I dropped to my knees, interlacing my fingers behind my head. I did not resist. I did not speak. I just watched as they swarmed the house. Behind the wall of blue uniforms, a black SUV pulled up. Blake jumped out. He was disheveled, his shirt torn, his face scratched. He looked like a man who had been through a war. "There he is!" Blake screamed, pointing at me. "That maniac. He broke into my house. He assaulted me and he kidnapped my wife. Oh God, where is she? Is she hurt?" He ran past the officers, who made no move to stop him. He ran into the house and I heard him shout her name with a fake sob. "Officer, please," I said calmly, my voice steady. "He is lying. Look at her medical records. Look at the bruises." "Shut up," the officer nearest me barked, pressing the barrel of his gun into my neck. "You have the right to remain silent, so use it." Blake emerged from the house, carrying Ebony. She was screaming, kicking weakly, trying to get away from him. "Daddy, help me!" she shrieked. "No, please, not him." Shh, baby. "It is okay," Blake cooed, holding her tight, pinning her arms to her sides. "You are having an episode. You are safe now. I have you." He looked at the officers, his eyes wide with performed anguish. "She is off her meds." He is confused. "Her? He has turned her against me? Look at what he did to her." He pointed at the IV bandage on her arm. "He was drugging her," he shouted. The officers looked at me with disgust. An old black man in a rundown villa, a wealthy white husband rescuing his sick wife. The narrative was written before I even opened the door. "Get him out of here," the sergeant ordered. "Take him downtown, booking for kidnapping, assault, and breaking and entering." They hauled me up, roughly wrenching my arms behind my back. The handcuffs clicked tight, biting into my wrists. I watched as they put Ebony into an ambulance. Blake climbed in after her, holding her hand, looking like the picture of a devoted husband. As they walked me past the ambulance to the patrol car, Blake looked out the window. Our eyes met. He smiled. It was a small, cold smile that did not reach his eyes. He mouthed 2 words: "You lose." The ambulance doors closed and they drove her away, back to the penthouse, back to the quiet room, back to the hell I had just pulled her from. I sat in the back of the police car, the hard plastic seat digging into my back. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I did not lose. I thought I had just changed the battlefield. I let them process me. I let them take my fingerprints. I let them take my mugshot. I sat in the holding cell surrounded by drunks and petty thieves, and I waited. I knew Strickland was already moving. I knew the wheels were turning. 2 hours later, a guard walked up to the bars. "Carter, you made bail. Your lawyer is here." I stood up, smoothing my shirt. I walked out into the fluorescent light of the station. Strickland was waiting for me, holding a briefcase. "The car is outside, sir," he said. I nodded, walking past him toward the exit. Just as I reached the doors, Blake walked in. He must have come to give a statement or to press charges. He stopped when he saw me. "You are out already," he sneered, stepping into my path. "You have. You, some savings left. Old man, good. You are going to need them for your defense attorney." I looked at him. I did not see a threat anymore. I saw a dead man walking. "Thanks for cleaning her up," Blake whispered, leaning in close, his breath smelling of mints covering the alcohol. "Thanks for the free detox. Now she is lucid enough to sign the papers for the land in Georgia. She is coming home tonight. Winston and she is going to sign everything." He patted my cheek, a condescending tap. "Go back to your hole," he said. "You tried your best, but you are out of your league." I did not flinch. I did not react. I just looked at him with the dead eyes of a shark. "We will see," I said. I walked past him out into the night. Strickland opened the door of the town car. "Is Phase 2 ready?" I asked, sliding into the leather seat. "Ready and waiting." "Sir," Strickland said, closing the door. "Good," I said, watching Blake through the glass doors of the station. "Let him have his victory lap, because tomorrow I am going to foreclose on his life." The holding cell smelled of bleach and unwashed bodies, a concrete box designed to strip a man of his dignity before the judge even saw his face. The guard shoved me inside, and the heavy steel door clanged shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I looked around the room. There were about 20 men inside, huddled on metal benches or pacing the small floor space like caged tigers. I found a spot in the corner and leaned against the cold wall, closing my eyes for a second to center myself. I was 70 years old, but I wasn't frail. I had survived the jungles of Vietnam and the boardrooms of New York. A county jail holding tank wasn't going to break me. But Blake knew that he knew a night in jail wouldn't break my spirit, so he had arranged for something that would break my body. I felt the shift in the room before I saw it. The low hum of conversation died out, replaced by a tense, expectant silence. I opened my eyes. 3 men were approaching me. They were young, hard, and covered in prison. "Hank!" The one in the middle was huge, a wall of muscle with a scar running from his ear to his chin. He cracked his knuckles, staring at me with dead eyes. "You the old man who likes to beat on women?" the big man asked, his voice a low rumble. I stood up slowly, keeping my back to the wall. I didn't answer. "Word is, you snatched your daughter and messed her up pretty bad," the man continued, taking another step closer. "Word is, there is a bounty on your head. Nice suit like that. Bets are you got money. But someone paid us to make sure you don't make it to your bail hearing." Blake hadn't just called the police. He had made a call to his connections inside. He wanted me hospitalized or dead before I could speak to a judge. The big man lunged a clumsy haymaker aimed at my jaw. I didn't block it. I stepped inside his guard, driving my elbow into his ribs and using his own momentum to slam him against the concrete wall. He grunted in pain and surprise, but his 2 friends were already moving in. I prepared myself. For a beating, I could take 1 or 2 of them, but not 3. Not at my age, but before the first punch landed, a voice cut through the tension like a whip. "Stand down." The 3 attackers froze mid-stride. They looked toward the back of the cell where a man was sitting on the top bunk of the only bed in the room. He was older than them, graying at the temples, reading a paperback book with a calmness that screamed authority. "I said, stand down," the man repeated, closing his book and hopping down from the bunk. The big man I had pinned against the wall looked at him, fear replacing the aggression in his eyes. "But, T-Bone," he said, "this guy is the target. The payout is canceled," the older man said, walking toward us, the sea of prisoners parting for him. He stopped in front of me and looked me up and down, his eyes narrowing as he studied my face. "Mr. Carter," he asked, his voice respectful. I looked at him closely, searching my memory through the tattoos and the scars, and then I saw at the eyes of a scared teenager I had met 20 years ago. "Jerome," I said. "Jerome Davis?" He smiled, a gold tooth glinting under the fluorescent lights. "I told you boys not to touch him," Jerome said, turning to the thugs. "This man paid for my mother's chemotherapy when the insurance company denied her. He gave me my first job when I got out of juvie. You touch a hair on his head, and you answer to me." The three men backed off immediately, muttering apologies. Jerome turned back to me and extended his hand. "I heard you were retired, Mr. Carter," Jerome said, shaking my hand firmly. "What is a man like you doing in a place like this, taking out the trash?" "Jerome," I said, "taking out the trash." He laughed, loud and deep. "Well, you are in my house now. You need anything?" "You got it." "I need a phone," I said. "I need to make a call that cannot be traced." Jerome nodded and pulled a small burner phone from his sock, handing it to me. "Do your business." "Mr. Carter," I dialed Strickland. The phone rang twice. "Sir," Strickland answered. "Execute the sell order," I said, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. "Dump it all, Strickland. Every share of Sterling Industries we acquired through the shell companies flood the market." "Are you sure, sir? This will crash the stock price by morning?" I looked around the cell at the men who had just tried to kill me at the concrete walls designed to hold me. "I don't want to crash it, Strickland," I said. "I want to incinerate it, sell everything." While I was fighting for my life in a cage, Blake Sterling was standing on a podium in front of the precinct, giving the performance of a lifetime. I watched it later on the news, but I could feel the effects of it even then, the way the guards looked at me with disgust, the way the narrative was shifting against me. Blake stood in front of a bank of microphones, his suit torn, artfully, his face scratched. He had probably done it himself. In the bathroom mirror next to him stood his mother, Victoria Sterling, looking like a grieving queen in her Chanel suit. "We are devastated." Blake choked out, wiping a fake tear from his eye. "We tried to help him. We tried to support my father-in-law despite his history of violence and mental instability. But today he crossed a line. He broke into our home and kidnapped my wife, his own daughter, dragging her out of her sickbed." He paused, letting the cameras click, letting the reporters scribble down his lies. "Ebony is safe now, thanks to the brave men and women of the police force. But she is traumatized. She needs extensive care, and unfortunately her father has drained her trust fund over the years, leaving us with nothing to pay for her recovery." A gasp went through the press corps. Lies upon lies piled so high they blocked out the sun. That is why Blake continued, his voice gaining strength. "We are launching the Ebony Fund, a charity dedicated to victims of domestic abuse, specifically elder abuse within families. We are asking for donations to help cover my wife's medical bills and legal fees to keep this dangerous man away from her." He looked directly into the camera, his eyes pleading and sincere. "Please help us save her from him." It was a masterstroke. He was not just defending himself, he was monetizing his crime. He was turning his victimhood into a revenue stream. Within minutes, the donations started pouring in, thousands of dollars from well-meaning strangers who thought they were helping a battered wife, not knowing they were funding her torturer. Blake left the podium, ignoring questions about his own finances, about the bruises on Ebony's arms that predated my arrival. He got into his limousine feeling invincible, feeling like he had won the public opinion war. He thought he had buried me under a mountain of bad press. He had no idea that while he was talking, I was cutting the financial legs out from under him. The market opened at 9 a.m. while I was still being processed for bail. Strickland executed the order at 9:01. Millions of shares of Sterling Industries, the conglomerate founded by Blake's grandfather, hit the market all at once. It was a tsunami of sell orders that triggered automated trading algorithms across the board. The price plummeted. At 9:15, trading was halted due to volatility, but the damage was done. Rumors started flying. Panic set in. Investors who had been holding onto the stock saw the massive dump and assumed the worst. They assumed bankruptcy. They assumed fraud. They assumed the end. They were right. By 9:30, when trading resumed, the stock was in free fall. It dropped 10%, then 20%, then 30%. Blake's net worth, which was entirely tied up in leveraged stock options, evaporated in real time. I sat in the processing room waiting for the paperwork to clear, watching the financial news ticker on the TV in the corner. Sterling Industries crashes. The headline screamed, "Stock down 40% in morning trading. CEO, Blake Sterling, unavailable for comment." I smiled. The guard called my name. Carter, you made bail. I stood up, handing the burner phone back to Jerome with a nod of thanks. Keep the change, I said. I walked out of the cell block. My suit rumpled, but my head high. Strickland was waiting for me in the lobby, holding a briefcase and a fresh change of clothes. Did it work? I asked. Strickland showed me his tablet, a graph with a steep red line plunging towards zero. He is underwater, sir, Strickland said. The margin calls are going out now. The banks are seizing his assets to cover the losses. By the end of the day, he won't even own the suit he is wearing. I nodded, feeling a cold satisfaction. Good, I said. I walked out into the sunlight, blinking against the glare. Blake thought he had won the news cycle. He thought he had turned the world against me, but he had forgotten one simple rule of war. You cannot fight an enemy, you cannot pay to fight. I had stripped him of his armor, now I was going to strip him of his skin. The Sterling family mansion sat on a hill overlooking the city like a fortress of old money and older secrets. It was a sprawling estate with manicured lawns and high iron gates designed to keep the world out. But tonight the gates were open, welcoming a parade of luxury sedans and limousines. Blake was throwing a party, not a celebration, but a desperate act of damage control following the catastrophic crash of his company's stock earlier that day. He needed to show the remaining shareholders and the vultures circling his legacy that everything was fine, that the rumors of bankruptcy and domestic abuse were just malicious lies spread by a vindictive father-in-law. He needed a prop to sell this fantasy, and that prop was my daughter. Inside the ballroom, under the glow of crystal chandeliers, Ebony sat in a wheelchair. She did not need a wheelchair for her legs, she needed it because she was too weak to stand from the cocktail of sedatives they had pumped into her system. Her face was a mask of heavy makeup layers of foundation and concealer plastered over the bruises I had seen just days before. She wore a high-necked gown with long sleeves hiding every mark, every scar, every piece of evidence of her husband's cruelty. She looked like a doll, a beautiful broken doll, posed for a picture she did not want to be in. Blake stood beside her, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to remind her of the consequences of disobedience. He smiled at the nervous investors, his teeth white and predatory, telling them that his wife was recovering beautifully from her traumatic abduction by her mentally unstable father. "Look at her," he would say, gesturing to her vacant smile. "She is happy to be home safe and sound. We are a united front. Nothing can break us." Ebony nodded mechanically when spoken to, her eyes fixed on a point in the middle distance. She was terrified. Not just for herself, but for me. Blake had told her that I was in prison, that I was being beaten, that if she did not play her part, I would disappear forever. She was protecting me with her silence, unaware that I was standing just outside the gates, ready to tear down the walls. I watched the arrival of the guests from the back of a tinted SUV parked across the street. I was not alone. Marcus sat beside me, monitoring the feeds from the drones we had hovering silently above the estate, getting clear shots of the guests, the security, and the woman in the wheelchair who looked like a ghost of my daughter. "It is time," I said, opening the car door. I stepped out onto the pavement, adjusting the cuffs of my suit. I was not wearing the old work jacket tonight. I was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Blake's car. I walked toward the main gate, my stride measured and calm. The security guards, two hulking men in ill-fitting blazers, stepped forward to block my path. "Mr. Carter," one of them said, his hand hovering near his belt. "You are not on the list. You need to leave." I did not stop walking. "Tell Mrs. Sterling." "I am here," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the hum of the idling engines. "Tell her the beggar has come to collect." Before the guard could respond, the intercom buzzed and the pedestrian gate clicked open. Victoria Sterling marched down the driveway, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. She was flanked by two more guards, her face twisted in a sneer of absolute revulsion. She stopped 5 feet from me, looking me up and down as if I were a pile of rotting garbage. "You have some nerve showing your face here," she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "After what you did to my son, after the lies you told the police, you should be rotting in a cell." I looked at her, this woman who had raised a monster and then protected him. She wore diamonds on her neck and hatred in her heart. "I am here for my daughter, Victoria," I said calmly. "Send her out, and I will leave." Victoria laughed, a shrill, harsh sound that grated on the ears. "You are delusional." "Winston." Ebony is exactly where she belongs. With her husband who loves her, she is terrified of you. She told the police you dragged her out of the house. She told them you hit her. We both know that is a lie, I said. It does not matter what is true, Victoria hissed, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. It only matters what we can prove, and right now the world sees a grieving family and a crazy old man who cannot let go. You are nothing. Winston, you are a bug on my windshield. Security, throw this beggar out, and if he resists, break his legs. The guards moved in, reaching for their batons. I did not flinch. I did not back down. I looked past them at the mansion glowing on the hill. You might want to hold off on that order, Victoria, I said, checking my watch. Why, she sneered. Are you expecting the cavalry? No, I said, looking up at the massive digital billboard that stood on the opposite side of the street facing the mansion gates. It was a prime advertising spot, usually reserved for luxury cars or designer watches. Currently, it was black. I'm expecting a movie. I pressed the button on the remote in my pocket. The billboard exploded into light, illuminating the street, the mansion gates, and Victoria's horrified face. It was not an advertisement. It was a video, grainy and dark but unmistakable. It was the footage from the penthouse, the footage I had recorded from the closet. Blake's voice boomed out over the street, amplified by the billboard's powerful speakers. She is our crazy servant, he said, his voice clear and cruel. Step around her. On the screen, a giant image of Blake wiped his muddy shoe on Ebony's back. The guests in the video laughed. Victoria froze, her mouth falling open. She looked from the screen to me, her eyes wide with shock. What is this? She whispered. What have you done? I did not answer. The video cut to a new clip, the audio from the bug I planted. You useless waste of space. Blake's voice roared, filling the night air. I will make you lick it off the floor. Inside the mansion, the party had stopped. The billboard was visible from the ballroom windows towering over the hedge line. The guests crowded the glass, watching in stunned silence as their host was revealed to be a monster. Blake came running out of the front door, his face pale, his composure shattered. He stared at the screen where he was currently dragging his wife by the hair. Turn it off, he screamed, running toward the gates. Turn it off right now. He reached the gate, breathless and frantic, seeing me standing there with his mother. You, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. You faked this. This is AI. This is a deep fake. You are trying to frame me. I looked at him calm and cold. It looks pretty real, Blake, I said. It is a lie, he yelled, turning to the guards and the few guests who had wandered out to see the commotion. He is using technology to ruin me. That is not my voice. That never happened. Prove it, I said, challenging him. I will prove it. Blake snarled, his eyes wild. Come inside, Winston. Come in and see for yourself. Ebony is happy. She is fine. Come in, and I will show everyone what a liar you are. He thought he was calling my bluff. He thought that if he got me inside, surrounded by his people and his security, he could control the narrative. He could force Ebony to say what he wanted. He could crush me. He had no idea he was inviting the wolf into the sheep pen. Open the gates. Blake ordered the guards, let him in. Let everyone see the truth. The heavy iron gates swung open. I stepped onto the property, my eyes locked on the front door where Ebony sat in her wheelchair, a silhouette against the light. I am coming, baby girl, I thought. And this time, I am not leaving alone. I walked into the ballroom of the Sterling mansion, surrounded by a hush so deep it felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Blake marched ahead of me, dragging the air of authority around him like a tattered cloak. He was desperate to prove that the video outside was a lie, that his finances were solid, that he was still the king of this hill. He walked straight to the head catering manager, a man named Pierre, who had been watching the scene at the gate with a look of growing concern on his face. Blake snapped his fingers, demanding attention, trying to perform wealth when he no longer possessed a dime. Pierre settled the bill. Now Blake commanded, his voice booming for the benefit of the remaining guests. I want everyone to see that the Sterlings pay their debts immediately. Put the entire evening on the black card, including the overtime for your staff, and a 20% tip. He pulled a heavy black titanium card from his wallet, the kind of card that is supposed to open any door in the world. He held it up, letting the light catch the surface, a talisman of power. He handed it to Pierre with a sneer, looking back at me to make sure I was watching. I was watching, all right. I was watching the end of his life. Pierre took the card and inserted it into the portable terminal. The machine beeped once. a sharp electronic tone that cut through the silence. Blake tapped his foot on the marble floor, waiting for the receipt, waiting for his vindication. Transaction declined. Pierre said, his voice low but audible in the quiet room. Blake laughed, a forced, nervous sound that fooled no one. Try it again. The chip is sensitive. It is a new card. Pierre tried again. He swiped it. He inserted it. He waited. The machine beeped again, a double tone of rejection. Declined, sir. The code says card seized by issuer. Blake's face turned the color of ash. Seize, that is impossible. I spoke to the bank this morning. Run it again. It will not work, sir, Pierre said, handing the card back like it was a piece of trash. Do you have another form of payment? The bill is $45,000. Blake scrambled, fumbling with his wallet, his hands shaking so badly he dropped a credit card on the floor. He bent down to pick it up. His dignity vanishing with every second, he pulled out a platinum card, then a gold one, then a corporate expense card. Try this one, he said, shoving the platinum card at Pierre. Try them all. I stood with my arms crossed, leaning against a pillar, watching the show. I knew exactly why the cards were not working minutes after I bought the debt. My legal team had filed emergency motions to freeze all assets associated with Sterling Corp and its guarantors due to suspected fraud. Blake was not just broke, he was frozen out of the financial system entirely. Declined, and declined. Pierre said, his patience evaporating. Sir, if you cannot pay, we will be contacting the authorities. Theft of services is a serious offense. Blake looked around the room, his eyes wide and panicked. The investors were whispering, checking their phones, seeing the stock crash, seeing the bankruptcy alerts. The illusion of wealth shattered, leaving only a sweating man in a suit he could not pay for. This is a mistake, Blake shouted, his voice cracking. It is a glitch. The system is down. Winston did this. He hacked the bank. He is trying to embarrass me. Nobody was looking at me. They were looking at him. They smelled the failure on him like blood in the water. Camilla Rhodes stood up from her table, her red dress rustling as she moved. She walked over to Blake, her face a mask of cold fury. She did not look at Ebony. She did not look at me. She only had eyes for the man who had promised her the world and delivered a bounced check. You told me you were liquid. Camilla hissed, her voice slicing through the room. You told me the trust fund was unlocked. You told me we were leaving for Paris tomorrow. Blake reached for her, trying to grab her hand. Camilla. Baby, listen. It is just a temporary hold. The bank is just verifying. The do not touch me, she snapped, recoiling from him as if he were diseased. I saw the news, Blake. I saw the stock price. Your company is worthless. Your assets are frozen. You are nothing. She turned to the crowd, her eyes scanning the room for a better option. A richer man, a safer harbor. Seeing none, she grabbed her purse. I am leaving, she announced. I am not going down with this ship. Do not call me. Do not come to my apartment. You are dead to me. Camilla, wait, Blake screamed, lunging after her, but he tripped over his own feet, stumbling onto the dance floor. She walked out, the heavy doors slamming behind her. The sound was like a gavel coming down, sentencing him to solitude. Blake knelt on the floor, breathing hard. He looked up and saw the faces of his guests. Disgust, pity, amusement. He saw his mother, Victoria, standing by the wall, her hand over her mouth, her eyes filled with shame. Then he saw Ebony. She was still sitting in the wheelchair by the entrance, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes watching him. She was the only one not looking at him with contempt. She was looking at him with something far worse. Clarity, Blake snapped. He scrambled to his feet, his face twisting into a rictus of pure hate. He needed to hurt someone. He needed to transfer his pain, his humiliation, his failure onto a target he could control. You! He roared, pointing a shaking finger at Ebony. You useless invalid! This is your fault! He stormed toward her, ignoring the gasps of the crowd, ignoring the security guards who stepped forward uncertainly. If you had just signed the papers, he screamed, spitting flying from his lips. If you were not such a stubborn, selfish burden, I would have had the money weeks ago. I endured you for 3 years. 3 years of your pathetic whining. 3 years of pretending to love a woman I despise. He reached her, towering over the wheelchair, his shadow engulfing her. I hate you, he hissed, his voice dropping to a register that vibrated with malice. I have hated you since the day I met. You You are nothing but a signature to me, a walking bank account. I wiped my shoes on you because that is what you are. Dirt. I drugged you because I could not stand to hear your voice. I wanted you dead. Do you hear me? I wanted you dead so I could take your money and live a real life. He grabbed the arms of the wheelchair, shaking it violently. You are a millstone around my neck. A useless, broken thing, and now you have cost me everything. The room was frozen in horror. He had just confessed to everything. He had admitted to the marriage fraud. He had admitted to the hatred. He had confirmed every accusation I had made. I stepped forward, ready to end him, ready to break every bone in his body. But I stopped, because Ebony moved. She did not flinch. She did not cower. She did not cry. She reached up and unbuckled the strap across her waist, the strap Blake had used to keep her bound to the chair. She placed her hands on the armrests, her grip strong and steady. "What are you doing?" Blake sneered. "Sit down, you cripple." Ebony pushed herself up. She stood slowly, her legs shaking for a moment before locking into place. She straightened her spine, rising to her full height. She was wearing heels and standing tall. She looked him in the eye. Blake took a step back, confusion warring with his rage. "Sit down," he commanded, his voice wavering. Ebony took a step forward, closing the distance between them. "I am not a cripple," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing out in the silent ballroom. She had not taken the pills he gave her this morning. My plant inside the house. The maid who had let me in earlier had swapped them for sugar pills days ago. The fog had lifted. The weakness was gone. She was awake. You are faking it," Blake stammered, backing away. "You are sick." "I was sick," Ebony corrected. "I was sick with you." She raised her hand. It was not a quick motion. It was deliberate, calculated. She pulled her arm back, channeling 3 years of abuse, 3 years of silence, 3 years of being a doormat into one single movement. She swung. Her hand connected with Blake's face with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. His head snapped to the side, saliva flying from his mouth. He stumbled backward, tripping over his own feet and landing hard on his backside. He looked up at her, clutching his cheek, his eyes wide with shock and fear. "You hit me," he whispered, disbelief coloring his tone. "I did," Ebony said, standing over him like an avenging angel. "And I'm going to do a lot more than that, because I'm awake, Blake. I am lucid. I remember everything. I remember the quiet room. I remember the drugs. I remember the shoes." She pointed to the corner of the room where a small red light was blinking on a tripod set up near the bandstand. "And so does everyone else," she said. Blake followed her finger. "That is a camera," Ebony said, her voice cold and hard. "It is connected to my father's phone. He is live streaming this entire party to the internet right now." Blake looked at me. I held up my phone, showing him the screen. The viewer count was climbing past 50,000. The comments were scrolling so fast they were a blur of anger and support for Ebony. "Say hello to the world." "Blake," I said, my voice grim. "You wanted an audience? Well, you got one." Blake looked at the camera, then at the guests, then at his mother. Victoria turned her back on him, walking away. Her head bowed in defeat. "No," Blake whimpered, scrambling backward on the floor like a crab. "No, this is not happening." "It is happening," Ebony said, stepping closer until she was looming over him. "I am taking my life back. Blake, and I am taking everything else with it. Get out of my sight." Blake looked around for an escape, for an ally, for anything, but there was nothing. Just the cold, judging eyes of the world, and the woman he had tried to break standing tall and unbroken. He scrambled to his feet, running toward the side exit, crashing through the service doors, fleeing into the night like the coward he was. Ebony watched him go. Then she turned to me, her eyes shining with tears, not of sadness, but of victory. I walked over to her and pulled her into my arms. She buried her face in my chest, and for the first time in years, she laughed, a sound of pure relief. "We did it, Daddy," she whispered. I kissed her forehead, holding her tight while the guests watched in silence, while the internet cheered, while the Sterling Empire crumbled to dust around us. "We did it, baby girl," I said, "but we are not done yet." The courtroom smelled of floor wax and old money, a scent designed to intimidate anyone who could not afford the $1,000 suits worn by the defense team. I sat in the front row watching the proceedings with the patience of a sniper waiting for his shot. Blake sat at the defense table looking cleaner than he had in days, His parents had clearly liquidated something substantial to pay for his legal team and to buy him a new suit. He looked confident, almost bored, as if this hearing was just a formality. A minor inconvenience before he regained control of his property, meaning my daughter Ebony sat beside me, her hand gripping mine so hard her knuckles were white. She was trembling not from fear but from the residual tremors of the withdrawal. She was clean, she was lucid, but she was fragile. She was terrified that the judge would believe the lies, that the system would fail her again. Blake's lawyer, a man named Harrison, with a smile like a razor blade, was pacing in front of the judge. Putting on a show, he was not arguing facts, he was arguing character. Specifically, mine. He was painting a picture of me that was so twisted it was almost impressive. "Your Honor," Harrison boomed, his voice filling the room, "we are here today to discuss the competency of Mrs. Sterling. But to do that, we must look at the environment she has been dragged into. Her father, Winston Carter, is a man of violence, a former Marine with a history of aggression, living in squalor on a government pension." He pointed a finger at me accusingly. "This man kidnapped my client's wife from her home, interrupting her medical treatment. He took her to a dilapidated shack in the middle of nowhere, exposing her to unsanitary conditions. Look at him. Your Honor, he is uneducated, he is poor, he is unstable, he has no means to care for a woman with complex psychiatric needs. He is projecting his own failures onto a loving husband, trying to save his wife from a father who clearly resents her success." I watched Blake nod solemnly, playing the victim perfectly. He dabbed at his eyes when his lawyer mentioned his loving devotion, the gallery muttered. People looked at me with suspicion, seeing only the old clothes I had worn to court, the rough hands of a worker, the stoic face of a man who has seen too much death. Harrison turned to the judge, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We are asking the court to grant immediate emergency guardianship to Mr. Sterling, and to issue a restraining order against Mr. Carter for the safety of the patient. We cannot allow a senile, violent pauper to dictate the medical care of a wealthy woman simply because they share DNA. It is dangerous, and frankly, it is negligent." The judge, a stern woman with glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked at me. "Mr. Carter, your counsel may cross-examine, but first, do you have anything to say regarding your financial ability to care for your daughter?" I stood up slowly, buttoning my jacket. I looked at Strickland, who gave me a subtle nod. "It was time I would like to take the stand, Your Honor," I said, my voice rough but steady. I walked to the witness box, ignoring the sneers from Blake's table. I swore to tell the truth, and I sat down facing the room. Harrison approached me like a shark smelling blood. "Mr. Carter," Harrison said, leaning on the railing, "you admit that you live on a pension of $800 a month, is that correct?" "That is what the government sends me." "Yes," I replied. "And you admit that you have no formal education beyond high school and military training?" "Correct," I said. "So tell me, Mr. Carter," Harrison smiled, turning to the audience, "how exactly do you plan to pay for your daughter's medical bills, for her therapy, for her housing, when you can barely afford to feed yourself? Are we supposed to believe you have a hidden fortune buried in your backyard?" He laughed, and the court laughed with him. Blake was grinning openly now, enjoying the humiliation. "I do not have a fortune in my backyard," I said calmly. "No," Harrison mocked. "Of course. Not you are a janitor. Mr. Carter, a laborer. You clean toilets for a living, do you not?" "I used to," I said, my voice hardening. "I cleaned toilets. I dug ditches. I laid bricks. I did whatever I had to do to survive and to build." "Build what?" Harrison scoffed. "A shack." "No," I said, leaning forward into the microphone, "to build an empire." I signaled to Strickland, who stood up and placed a thick stack of documents on the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I said, my voice ringing out clearly in the sudden silence, "my pension is $800 because I donate my salary to charity. I do not live in a shack. I live in a fortress I built to keep parasites like your client away from my family." I turned to look directly at Blake, whose grin was starting to falter. "My name is Winston Carter," I said, "and I am the founder and majority shareholder of Carter Holdings, a private equity firm specializing in distressed assets and high-risk debt acquisition." A murmur went through the room. Harrison looked confused, looking at the papers Strickland had submitted. "I may be uneducated by your standards, Mr. Harrison," I continued, "but I know how to count, and right now I am counting the $80 million of debt that the Sterling family owes to various creditors. Debt that, as of 3 days ago, belongs to me." Blake stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is a lie," he shouted. "He is lying. He is a broke old man." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," the judge barked, banging her gavel. "I own your mortgage, Blake," I said, my voice cold and relentless. "I own the loan on your car. I own the debt your father took out to save his failing company. I own 80% of everything you think is yours. You called me a pauper. You called me a beggar. But the truth is, son, I am your landlord, I am your banker, and I am the man who is about to foreclose on your entire life." The courtroom erupted. Reporters were typing furiously. The judge was reading the documents, her eyes widening with every page Blake sank back into. His chair, his face, the color of old paper. He looked at his lawyer, but Harrison was staring at me with a look of dawning horror. He realized he had just insulted a man who could buy his law firm and turn it into a parking lot. "I am not asking for custody because I need money, Your Honor," I said, turning back to the judge. "I am asking for custody because this man is a fraud, a bankrupt abuser who married my daughter for her trust fund and tried to drive her insane when the money ran out." "Prove it," Harrison stammered, trying to regain control. "You have no proof of abuse, just the word of a woman you kidnapped and drugged." I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who has cornered the sheep. "I thought you might say that," I said. I nodded to Strickland again. He plugged a flash drive into the court's multimedia system. The large screens on the walls flickered to life. "This video was taken 5 days ago inside the penthouse," I said. The video played. It was dark, grainy footage, but the audio was crystal clear. "She is our crazy servant." Blake's voice boomed through the courtroom speakers step around her. The audience gasped as they watched Blake Sterling, the loving husband, wipe his muddy golf shoes on his wife's back while she lay on the floor. They watched him kick her. They heard him laugh. I saw the judge's face harden into stone. She looked from the screen to Blake with an expression of pure disgust. "But that is not all," I said as the video ended, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. "I also have this." Strickland handed another document to the judge. "This is a sworn affidavit from Dr. Eris Thorne, the psychiatrist who diagnosed my daughter. I said the doctor was arrested by the FBI yesterday morning for medical fraud and accepting bribes in exchange for testimony. He admitted that Blake Sterling paid him $50,000 to fabricate a diagnosis of schizophrenia and to prescribe veterinary sedatives to keep my daughter compliant." Blake jumped up again, knocking his table over. "She is crazy," he screamed, his voice high and hysterical. "She is crazy, and he is lying. That video is fake. That doctor is a liar." "Mr. Sterling," the judge shouted, "sit down or I will have you bound." But I wasn't done. And finally I said, pulling a piece of paper from my own pocket, "I have the toxicology report from the night I rescued her. It shows lethal levels of ketamine and xylazine in her blood, drugs that are not approved for human use, drugs that were found in your bathroom cabinet." "Blake." I looked at him. He was trembling, shaking his head, mumbling to himself. He looked at his mother in the gallery, but Victoria had her head in her hands. She knew it was over. "Your Honor," I said, my voice quiet but powerful. "This man treated my daughter like an animal. He broke her mind. He broke her body, and he did it for money. Money he doesn't even have anymore because I own it all." The judge looked at me, then at Ebony, who was sitting tall, tears streaming down her face, but her head held high. Then she looked at Blake. "Mr. Sterling." The judge said, her voice icy, "Stand up." Blake stood swaying on his feet. "The petition for guardianship is denied with prejudice." The judge ruled effective immediately. Full custody and control of her assets are returned to Mrs. Ebony Sterling. Furthermore, based on the evidence presented here today, evidence of assault, kidnapping, medical fraud, and the administration of illicit substances, I am revoking your bail on the previous charges and I am ordering you remanded to custody immediately. She banged the gavel, a sound like a gunshot. "Bailiff, take him into custody." 2 court officers moved toward Blake. He backed away, holding his hands up. No, you cannot do this. I am Blake Sterling. My family built this city." "Your family is bankrupt, Blake," I said, standing up, and the rent is due." The officers grabbed him. He struggled, screaming, cursing, crying like a child. He looked at me with eyes full of hate. "I will kill you," he screamed as they dragged him toward the side door. "I will kill you, old man." I watched him go, feeling the weight of the last 3 years lift off my shoulders. I looked at Ebony. She stood up and walked into the well of the court. She didn't look at Blake. She looked at me. "Let us go home, Daddy," she said. I took her arm and we walked down the aisle, the crowd parting for us, the reporters shouting questions. I ignored them all. I had said everything I needed to say. We walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, leaving the darkness behind us, leaving Blake Sterling in the cage he had built for himself. Money has a way of opening doors, even heavy steel prison doors. Blake Sterling did not stay in his cell for long. His mother, Victoria, had managed to liquidate her jewelry collection and leverage the last of the family's unfreezed assets to post his bail. It was a desperate move, a final gamble to save the prince of a crumbling kingdom. But Blake was not thinking about saving his family. He was thinking about saving himself. He hit the streets with the frantic energy of a cornered animal. He knew. The accounts were frozen. He knew his credit was dead, but he also knew there was one thing the lawyers and the bankers had not found yet. The wall safe in the penthouse master bedroom inside were $50,000 in cash, loose diamonds, and a fake passport he had bought years ago for a rainy day. Well, it was pouring now. He drove his mother's sedan like a maniac, running red lights, tires screeching as he tore toward the Sterling Plaza. He did not care about the law. He did not care about safety. He only cared about that safe, about the exit strategy that would get him out of the country before the trial began. He stormed into the lobby, ignoring the doorman who tried to stop him. He pushed past the concierge who was on the phone with security and jammed his finger into the elevator button. He paced the small metal box as it rose, sweating, shaking, muttering to himself. He was running on adrenaline and pure entitlement, convinced that if he could just get that money, he could fix everything, or at least run away from the mess he had made. He reached the penthouse floor and ran to the door. His keys were trembling in his hand. He shoved the key into the lock and turned it, but it did not move. He tried again, forcing it, jiggling it, but the cylinder was solid. The locks had been changed. "No!" he screamed, kicking the wood. "No! You cannot do this!" He did not call a locksmith. He did not call the police. He went to the emergency stairwell and grabbed the fire axe from behind the glass. He was beyond reason. Now he was a vandal, breaking into his own life. He swung the axe, the wood splintered, he swung again, tearing a hole near the handle. He reached through, unlocked the deadbolt from the inside, and threw the door open. He stumbled into the foyer chest, heaving, expecting darkness, expecting emptiness, expecting to grab his cash and run. Instead, he walked into a cloud of thick, fragrant smoke. The lights were on. Not the harsh overheads, but the soft, ambient lighting he used to set for his parties. Jazz music was playing softly in the background. The air smelled of expensive leather and Cuban tobacco. Blake stopped the axe hanging from his hand, confusion warring with his panic. He walked into the living room and froze. Ebony was sitting in his favorite chair, the high-backed leather wingback that he used to call his throne, but she did not look like the broken woman he had tortured. She did not look like the scared girl he had dragged out of the closet. She looked like a queen. She was wearing a white power suit, sharp and tailored to perfection. Her hair was styled in a sleek, elegant crown. Her makeup was flawless, highlighting the strength in her jaw and the fire in her eyes. She held a crystal glass of sparkling water in one hand, and she looked at him with an expression of absolute indifference. I was standing by the window looking out at the city lights, smoking a Cohiba cigar, the kind Blake used to buy but could never afford. "Winston," he breathed, his eyes darting between us. "What are you doing here? Get out of my house." I took a slow drag from the cigar and exhaled the smoke curling toward the ceiling. "It is not your house, son," I said, my voice calm, contrast to his hysteria. "I bought the building this morning." I continued, turning to face him. "The bank was very eager to offload the toxic asset you created. I own the walls. I own the floor. I own the air. You are breathing. And right now, you are trespassing." Blake shook his head, backing away. Denial written all over his face. "No, that is impossible." "That is. My lawyers are fixing it. This is mine." "It was never yours," Ebony said, her voice cutting through his delusions like a knife. "It was bought with lies, maintained with debt, and stolen from my family." Blake looked at her, and for a moment the old arrogance flared up. He remembered the safe. He remembered the money. "I do not care about the building," he spat, dropping the axe. "I just want my things. I am going to the bedroom. I am getting my personal property, and I am leaving." He started to move toward the hallway, toward the safe. "Stop," I said. He ignored me. He was focused on the money. I said, "Stop," Ebony commanded. She reached down beside the chair and picked up a heavy canvas bag. She upended it over the coffee table. Cash spilled out stacks of $100 bills. Diamonds glittered in the light. The blue passport slid to the top of the pile. Blake stopped dead, his eyes locked on the pile of wealth that represented his freedom. "Give it to me," he said, his voice trembling. "Give me my money." Ebony stood. She moved with grace and power, no longer hindered by drugs or fear. She walked around the table, standing between him and the cash. "This is not your money," she said. "This is the interest on the pain you caused me." She reached into the pile and pulled out something else, something that did not belong there. It was a gray rag, torn and stained with mud and old blood. It was the dress she had been wearing the night I found her, the dress he had wiped his shoes on. She threw it at him. It hit him in the chest and fell to the floor, a dirty puddle of fabric on the pristine rug. "You want your money?" Ebony asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Blake nodded. "Yes, just let me take it, and I will go." Ebony pointed at the rag. "You said I was a servant," she said. "You said I was a crazy servant who liked to sleep on the floor. You wiped your mud on me. You made me clean your mess." She took a step closer, her eyes blazing. "Well, now the roles are reversed, Blake." She pointed to the hallway leading to the front door, the hallway he had just walked through with his dirty street shoes. "Clean it," she ordered. Blake stared at her. "What I said. Clean it." Ebony repeated, her voice rising. "Clean the hallway. Wipe up your footprints. Do it with that rag. Do it with your tongue. I do not care. Just clean my floor." "You are crazy," Blake hissed. "I am not cleaning anything. Get out of my way." He lunged for the table, reaching for the cash. He never made it. Two shadows detached themselves from the wall near the kitchen. My personal security team. Huge men who made Blake look like a child. They moved with blurring speed. One of them caught Blake by the throat mid-lunge, lifting him off his feet. The other grabbed his belt. "No, let me go!" Blake screamed, flailing uselessly, kicking at the air. "My money. That is my money." I walked over to the table and picked up the passport. I flipped it open, looking at the fake name, Alan Smythe. I read, shaking my head. "Not very original, Blake." I tossed the passport into the fireplace where a gas fire was. Crackling pleasantly, it caught instantly, curling into ash. "No," he wailed, tears streaming down his face. "Throw him out," Ebony said, sitting back down in her chair and taking a sip of her water. The guards marched him to the door, his feet dragging on the floor. He tried to grab the doorframe, his fingernails scratching the wood. "You cannot do this," he screamed. "I am Blake Sterling." "You are nobody," I said. They swung him like a battering ram and threw him out into the corridor. He landed hard, skidding across the carpet. He scrambled to his knees, looking back into the apartment, looking at the money he could not touch, looking at the wife he could not break. Ebony looked at him one last time. "And Blake," she called out, her voice cool and composed. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. "You missed a spot," she said. One of the guards slammed the door in his face, engaging the new heavy-duty locks. I heard him screaming in the hallway, pounding on the wood, crying for his mother, crying for his money. Walked over to the intercom and pressed the button for the lobby. "Security," I said. "Yes, Mr. Carter. There is a trespasser on the penthouse floor. Remove him from the building, and if he resists, call the police." "Understood, sir." I turned back to the room. Ebony was staring at the fire, her face peaceful. I picked up the stack of cash and handed it to her. "What do you want to do with this?" I asked. She looked at the money, then at the fire. "Burn it," she said. "No," I laughed. "That is illegal and wasteful. We will donate it to the women's shelter." She smiled, a real smile. "Even better." I poured myself a drink and sat down opposite her, listening to the sirens approaching in the distance, coming to collect the trash we had just thrown out. It was a good night. 3 weeks on the streets of the city I owned had turned Blake Sterling into a ghost of the man he used to be. The city did not care about his last name or his former credit score. It only cared about survival. And Blake had no survival skills. He had burned every bridge he had ever crossed. His friends, the ones who drank his scotch and laughed at his cruelty, had blocked his number the moment the stock crashed. His mistress Camilla had left town with a hedge fund manager and his parents. Well, that was the coldest cut of all. Victoria, Sterling had issued a public statement disowning her son, citing his moral failings as a stain on the family legacy. She had changed the locks on the mansion, and hired armed guards with specific instructions to shoot trespassers even if the trespasser was her own flesh and blood. I watched him from the monitors in my office on the 45th floor of Carter Tower. He was standing in the lobby arguing with the security desk. He looked like a scarecrow, his designer. Suit was stained and torn, the fabric hanging off his frame. He had lost 20 pounds. His hair was matted and he was missing a shoe. He was hopping on one foot trying to maintain some shred of dignity, while the other foot was wrapped in dirty rags and duct tape. He was begging the guard to call me. He was crying, saying it was a matter of life and death. "Let him up," I said into the intercom. "Send him to the main conference room. I wanted Ebony to see this. I wanted her to see the monster reduced to a mouse. I wanted her to realize that the man she had feared, the man who had controlled her every breath, was nothing without his money." Ebony was sitting at the head of the conference table reviewing the quarterly projections for the women's shelter we were building. She looked up when I entered, her eyes clear and sharp. "He is here?" she asked. I nodded. "He is coming up." "Are you going to give him money?" she asked, her voice neutral. I smiled, a tight, humorless smile. "I am going to give him an opportunity." The elevator doors opened down the hall and I could smell him before I saw him. It was the sour reek of unwashed skin and desperation. Blake stumbled into the room flanked by two of my largest security officers. He stopped when he saw us, his eyes darting around the opulent office, taking in the mahogany walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows, the view of the empire he had tried to steal. He looked at Ebony, and for a second the old arrogance flickered in his eyes, but it died instantly, replaced by a hunger that was painful to watch. "Ebony," he croaked, his voice raspy from dehydration. "Baby, please help me." He lunged toward her, but my guard stepped in front of him, blocking his path like a stone wall. "Stay back," I ordered, my voice echoing in the large room. "Sit down." Blake collapsed into the chair at the far end of the table. He was shaking his hands, trembling on the polished wood. He looked at the pitcher of water in the center of the table, his tongue darting out to lick, cracked. "Lips, please," he whispered. "Water." I nodded to the guard, who poured a glass and slid it down the table. Blake grabbed it with both hands, drinking so fast he choked water spilling down his chin onto his ruined shirt. "Thank you," he gasped, wiping his mouth. "Thank you, Winston. I knew you were a good man." I stared at him, saying nothing. "I have nowhere to go." Blake rambled, the words spilling out of him in a torrent. "My parents locked me out. My accounts are gone. I haven't eaten in 2 days. Winston, I am sleeping in a culvert under the highway. Me, a sterling, sleeping in the mud." The irony was not lost on me. He was sleeping in the mud just like he had forced Ebony to sleep on the floor. "I made mistakes," Blake continued, tears cutting tracks through the grime on his face. "I know that now I was stressed, the business was failing. I wasn't myself, the drugs, the pressure. It broke me, but I love Ebony. I never stopped loving her." He looked at my daughter, his eyes pleading. "Ebony, tell him about the good. Times before the trouble. I can get better, baby. I can go to rehab. We can start over. I will sign a postnuptial agreement. I will do anything. Just please don't let me die on the street." Ebony looked at him. She did not look angry. She did not look afraid. She looked at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist examining a bug under a microscope. "You tried to kill me." "Blake," she said, her voice calm, "you tried to drive me insane so you could steal my grandmother's money." "I was desperate," he wailed. "I was not thinking straight." "You were thinking perfectly straight," I corrected him. "You planned it for months. You hired a forger. You bribed a doctor. That is not stress, Blake. That is malice." "I am sorry," he sobbed, sliding out of the chair and falling to his knees. He crawled toward us, dragging his rag-wrapped foot across the carpet. "Please, I am begging you. I will do anything. I will be your servant. I will do whatever you want. Just give me a chance to prove I have changed." He was on his knees, the position he had forced Ebony into so many times, begging for scraps. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. "You won." "Winston," he whispered, "you beat me. You took my company. You took my house. You took my wife. You have everything. Show some mercy. You are a man of God, aren't you? Doesn't the Bible say to forgive?" I stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city I had built. "The Bible says a lot of things, Blake." I said, "It talks about sowing and reaping. It talks about justice." I turned back to him. "You say you will do anything I asked. Anything." Blake promised, nodding frantically. Anything, just name it. I walked to the closet in the corner of the office and opened the door inside. Hanging on a single hook was a bright orange jumpsuit, the kind worn by prison work crews and highway cleanup staff. Next to it was a pair of heavy rubber boots and a bucket filled with industrial cleaning supplies. I took the hanger and walked back to the table, throwing the jumpsuit down in front of him. "Put it on," said Blake, looked at the orange fabric, then at me, confusion clouding his eyes. "What is this?" "It is your new uniform," I said. "Uniform for what?" he asked. "For your job," I replied. Blake blinked, hope rising in his chest. "A job? You are giving me a job." "Thank you, Winston. I can run a division for you. I know the real estate market. I can consult." I laughed, a dry barking sound that made him flinch. "You are not going to be a consultant, Blake," I said. "I do not hire thieves to run my company." I pointed to the bucket. "You are going to be a janitor." Blake recoiled as if I had slapped him. "A janitor? Me?" "Yes. You," I said, my voice hard. "You called me a janitor, didn't you? You mocked my work boots. You mocked my hands. You told your friends I was here to fix the toilet. Well, now you are going to fix the toilets." "I cannot do that," he stammered. "I am a sterling." "You are a beggar." I snapped. "You have a debt, Blake, a debt of $2 million. That is the amount you stole from Ebony's trust, plus the legal fees, plus the damages for pain and suffering." I pulled a contract from my jacket pocket and slammed it on the table. "Here are the terms," I said. "You will work for Carter Holdings as a sanitation specialist, specifically assigned to the maintenance of the executive washrooms and the basement levels. Your starting salary is $8 an hour." $8, Blake whispered, horror dawning on him. "That will take forever." "I did the math," I said, enjoying the look on his face. "It will take you roughly 125,000 hours to pay off the principal, assuming you work 40 hours a week. That is about 60 years. 60 years, he screamed, standing up, his pride momentarily overcoming his hunger. "You are insane. I will not do it. I will not scrub floors for you. Then you go to prison," I said simply. I picked up my phone. I have the district attorney on speed dial. "Blake, the fraud charges regarding the trust fund are federal. The medical kidnapping charges are felonies. If I make this call, you will go to a maximum security facility where you will not be cleaning toilets. You will be fighting for your life every single day. And given your soft hands and your pretty face, I do not think you will last a week." Blake froze. He knew I was right. He knew what awaited him inside. He looked at the phone in my hand, then at the orange jumpsuit on the floor. "It is your choice," I said. "Freedom with a mop or a cage with a roommate named Spike." Ebony stood up and walked over to the bucket. She picked up a scrub brush and held it out to him. "You told me to clean the floor with my tongue," she said, her voice quiet. "Remember that? Blake, you told me I was a servant." She dropped the brush at his feet. "Now you are the servant." Blake looked at the brush. He looked at the jumpsuit. He looked at us, standing tall and clean and powerful. He looked at the door, but he knew there was nothing out there for him but hunger and cold. Slowly, painfully, he bent down and picked up the jumpsuit. His hands were shaking so hard he could barely hold it. He began to unbutton his ruined suit jacket, the last vestige of his former life. Dropping it on the floor, he stepped out of his trousers, standing in his boxers, shivering in the air-conditioned office. He stepped into the orange legs of the jumpsuit, pulling it up over his chest. He zipped it up, the sound loud in the silent room. It fit him poorly, bagging at the waist, tight in the shoulders. He looked ridiculous. He looked defeated. "Put on the boots," I ordered. He sat on the floor and pulled on the heavy rubber boots, lacing them up over his rag-wrapped foot. "There," I said, handing him a security badge with his photo on it. "Access level 0, restricted to maintenance areas only. Now, pick up the bucket." Blake grabbed the handle of the bucket, his knuckles white. "Where do I start?" he whispered. His head hung low, his spirit broken. I pointed to the door. "The men's room on this floor has not been cleaned since this morning," I said. "And Blake?" He looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Make sure you get under the rim." He walked out of the office, the bucket banging against his leg, the rubber boots squeaking on the marble floor. He did not look back. I watched him go, watched him turn the corner toward the restrooms. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Ebony. She was watching the empty doorway, a look of finality on her face. "He is gone," she said. "No," I corrected. "He is just where he belongs." I picked up the phone and dialed the building manager. "The new hire is on his way down," I said. "Make sure he clocks in and tell the staff if they see him slacking off to dock his pay." I hung up and turned to my daughter. "Let us get lunch," I said. "I know a place that makes the best sandwiches in the city, and they don't cost $5. We walked out of the office, leaving the contract on the table unsigned but binding, leaving the past in a bucket of dirty water. The air in the hallway smelled fresh and clean. It smelled like justice. The salt spray hit my face, cooling the skin that had been burning with rage for half a year. The ocean was a deep, endless blue stretching out to the horizon like a promise kept. I stood on the teak deck of the Lady Ebony, a 100-foot yacht that I had purchased 2 weeks ago, not as a status symbol but as a sanctuary. The engines hummed beneath my feet, a low vibration of power that carried us further and further away from the concrete jungle where we had fought our war. I looked over at the lounge chair near the stern where my daughter lay sleeping in the sun 6 months ago. She was curled on a cold marble floor, flinching at the sound of footsteps. 6 months ago she was a ghost, addicted to horse tranquilizers and terror. Today she was whole. Her skin glowed with health. The bruises were long gone, faded into bad memories that we rarely spoke of. She wore a bright yellow sundress the color of hope, and her chest rose and fell in a steady, peaceful rhythm. She was no longer the servant she was, the queen of her own life. I took a sip of my iced tea and leaned against the railing, watching the wake of the ship churn the water white. I felt a lightness in my chest that I had not felt since before my wife passed away. It was the feeling of a mission accomplished, the feeling of a soldier who has hung up his rifle and come home. The last 6 months had been a blur of reconstruction. We had dismantled the Sterling Empire piece by piece, selling off the assets to fund a new foundation dedicated to helping victims of financial abuse. We had turned the pain into purpose, but today was not about business. Today was about freedom. It was about breathing air that did not smell of bleach or betrayal. It was about reclaiming the time that had been stolen from us. I watched Ebony stir. She stretched her arms over her head and opened her eyes, shielding them from the sun. She saw me watching her and smiled a genuine smile that reached her eyes. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a sharp intelligence that reminded me so much of her mother. "Hey, Daddy," she called out, her voice strong against the wind. "Where are we?" "We are exactly where we want to be." "Baby girl," I said, walking over to her. I sat on the edge of her chair, nowhere and everywhere. She laughed, and the sound was music to my ears. She sat up, reaching for her tablet which lay on the table beside her. "Is it time for the inspection?" she asked, a mischievous glint in her eye. I checked my watch. It was 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. "It is," I said, pulling my own tablet from my bag. We sat together side by side and logged into the secure server. It was our daily ritual, a reminder of why we were here and why they were there. I tapped the icon for the security camera network of Carter Tower, formerly the Sterling Plaza, and brought up the feed for the sub-basement level. The image flickered to life in high definition. There he was. Blake Sterling was pushing a mop bucket down a long gray corridor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly green pallor on his skin. He was wearing the orange jumpsuit I had given him, but it was no longer new. It was stained with grime and sweat torn at the knees, faded from daily washing. He looked 20 years older. His hair was thinning. His posture stooped. He walked with a limp, favoring the foot that had never properly healed because he could not afford the physical therapy. He stopped at a door marked Executive Washroom and sighed a puff of breath visible in the cold basement air. He reached into the bucket and pulled out a sponge, squeezing the gray water onto the floor. I zoomed in on his face. His eyes were dead hollow pits of resignation. There was no arrogance left, no sneer, no fire, just the dull, repetitive misery of a man who knows he has 60 years left on his sentence. He dropped to his knees on the hard tile and began to scrub. "Look at him," Ebony said, her voice devoid of pity. "He missed a spot in the corner. Yesterday, did the supervisor write him up?" I checked the log. Yes, he was. Yes, he docked an hour of pay that puts him back another $12. $12, I mused. That is a sandwich for us, but for him, it is an hour and a half of his life gone. Blake scrubbed harder, his movements jerky and angry. He muttered to himself, lips moving in a silent litany of complaints that no one would ever hear. The camera caught the name tag on his chest. Janitor Sterling. It was the only place his family name appeared anymore. The Sterling family name had been scrubbed from the city as thoroughly as Blake scrubbed that floor. Victoria and her husband had lost the mansion the bank had foreclosed 3 months ago, seizing everything down to the silver spoons. They were currently living in a 2-bedroom walk-up in the worst part of town, a neighborhood they used to joke about avoiding. They were surviving on Social Security and the charity of the few friends who had not abandoned them, which was a very short list. I switched the feed to the exterior camera showing the loading dock. A delivery truck was backing in, and I saw Blake's father arguing with the driver trying to get a job unloading boxes. The driver laughed and waved him away. The great patriarch of the Sterling dynasty, reduced to begging for day labor. "They have nothing," Ebony whispered, watching the screen. "They have absolutely nothing. They have their lives," I corrected her, "which is more than they wanted to leave us with." Blake stood up, wringing out the sponge. He wiped his forehead with the back of his sleeve, leaving a smear of dirt across his face. He looked up at the camera for a second, staring directly into the lens, as if he knew we were watching from the middle of the ocean. He did not look defiant. He looked broken. He looked like a man who had finally realized that the world did not owe him a living. I closed the app, the screen going black. "Enough of him," I said. "He has a lot of toilets to clean, and we have a sunset to watch." Ebony put her tablet away and looked at me, her expression turning serious. "Daddy," she said, taking my hand. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, baby." "Do you think we went too far?" she asked. "Do you think making him do this, making him a servant, was it too cruel?" I looked at her hand resting in mine. Her skin was smooth again, but I could still feel the phantom tremors of the night I found her. I remembered the shoe on her back. I remembered the closet. I remembered the drugs. I looked out at the ocean, thinking about justice, thinking about the balance of the universe. Cruelty is hurting someone who cannot defend themselves. I said, cruelty is taking pleasure in the suffering of the innocent. What we did was not cruelty, Ebony. It was education. Education, she asked. Yes, I said, squeezing her hand. We taught him the value of $1. We taught him the weight of labor. We taught him that the people he looked down on, the people he called servants and janitors and garbage, were the ones holding up his world. He is learning humility. Baby girl, it is a hard lesson, but it is the only one that sticks. Ebony nodded, looking back at the horizon. You are right, she said. He wiped his shoes on me because he thought I was dirt. Now he knows what dirt tastes like. Exactly. I said. I stood up and walked to the railing, the wind whipping my shirt around me. I felt strong. I felt capable. I felt like the father I was always meant to be. Ebony joined me, leaning against my side. You know what the best part is? She asked. What is that? He thinks you did this because you are rich, she said, looking up at me. He thinks you beat him because you had more money. I chuckled, reaching into my pocket and pulling out a cigar. I cut the end and lit it, the smoke drifting away on the breeze. He thinks a lot of things, I said. But that is not it, she continued. It is not the money, Daddy. It is you. You could have done this with $5 in your pocket. You would have found a way. I looked at my daughter, the woman who had survived hell and come out made of steel. You are right, I said, taking a drag from the cigar. The money was just a tool, like a hammer or a wrench, but the will, the drive to protect you that came from something else. I turned to face her, looking her dead in the eye. Listen to me, Ebony, I said, my voice serious. Never let anyone define your worth by the number in your bank account or the color of your skin or the job you do. I pointed back toward the city, toward the tower, where Blake was scrubbing floors. That man thought he was better than us because he was born in a mansion and we were born in the real world. He thought his blood was blue and ours was common. But when you strip away the suits and the trust funds and the lies, what is left? Character, I said, tapping my chest. Character is what is left. He showed us his character when he thought no one was watching. He showed us he was small and mean and weak. And you, I said, cupping her chin, you showed us you were a warrior. You survived. You fought back. You rose up. That is value, Ebony. That is true. Wealth. Tears welled in her eyes. But she did not let them fall. She smiled a smile that was all Carter. I learned from the best, she said. I laughed loud and long, the sound carrying over the water. You certainly did, I said. I put my arm around her and we watched the sun begin to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. It was the end of a long, dark chapter and the beginning of a story we would write ourselves. Blake Sterling would spend the rest of his life looking at the floor, scrubbing away the stains of his own arrogance. But us. I took a final drag of the cigar and flicked the ash into the sea, watching it disappear into the waves. We were going to keep looking up. I smiled, the same cold, satisfied smile I had worn the night I bought his debt because the view from the top was spectacular and we had earned every single inch of it. We often measure success by the cars we drive or the suits we wear, but true power is not about what you own, it is about how you protect the ones you love. Blake. Sterling had everything money could buy, but he lacked the currency that matters most. Integrity. He thought he could trample on the weak because he believed wealth gave him immunity. He learned the hard way that dignity is not for sale, and that the quietest man in the room is often the one holding all the cards. Never let anyone define your worth by your bank account. Your character is your true net worth. Do you think Blake deserved his punishment, or was I too cruel? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.